Chapter 471. Except for Ji Haoran and Ning Ke, the two generations of people who had entered the human realm, the back of the mountain of the academy had never entered the human realm. The soldiers of the Yulin royal guards on the other side of the bridge did not know who the man sitting cross-legged in the snow was. Hearing that this person actually dared to be so disrespectful to General Su Shi and be so arrogant, the imperial guards were instantly enraged to the extreme. Their beards and hairs stood on end as if they wanted to pierce through the armor on their bodies, and they drew their swords and spears with the intention of charging onto the snow bridge and beheading that bastard on the spot. Su Shi raised his right arm expressionlessly, and the commotion and killing intent behind him immediately subsided. He looked at the man sitting cross-legged in the snow and became serious. He said, "Is the academy really going to go back on its words?" Second brother looked at him under the bridge and said, "The academy does not object to Xiaoho's retirement, nor does it object to youngest brother's challenge. Because there is no way to object." Su Shi frowned and said, "You know I'm going to object to this." Second brother said, "I object to your objection." Su Shi looked at the man on the bridge. After a long silence, he asked in a hoarse voice, "Is this the headmaster's idea?" Second brother said, "No, it's my idea." Su Shi squinted and said, "That's why you are standing on the bridge." Second brother sat cross-legged in the snow, tall and straight. His robe did not tremble in the wind. He looked like a pine tree in the snow peak, very much like the great figure of the academy. He looked at Su Shi and the cavalry of the Yulin royal guards under the bridge and said expressionlessly, "I respect youngest brother, so I will not interfere. But I want him to be fair." In the imperial study of the palace, angry curses, fierce arguments, idiots, and all kinds of filthy words kept ringing. They were like snowflakes dancing in the sky, spreading everywhere. Nation Master Li Qingshan left the academy and entered Chang'an as fast as he could. He came to the newly renovated small Taoist temple. Because of the heavy snow, the neighborhood celebration had ended hastily. Yi Su smiled after hearing what happened in the imperial city and disappeared in the wind and snow. Many horse carriages came from the streets outside the imperial city. All the forces who had received the news had sent people to inquire about it, including the envoys of various countries and the representatives of the West Hill Divine Palace. In a pavilion far away from the moat, Yi Hongyu, who was dressed in a green Taoist robe, looked in the direction of the palace gate. She looked at the blood flag and the dazzling big black umbrella that were fluttering in the wind and snow. She remained silent. Chen Pipi brought Tang Xiaotang from the other end of the snowy street. Because of Tang Xiaotang's status, he did not let her follow him to the imperial palace. He turned around and knocked on the tightly closed door of a shop on the South Street. He borrowed a chair from that shop and then moved his round body from the snowy street to the foot of the imperial city. He looked at Ning Ke and said, "Before preparing to fight, you have to conserve your strength." Ning Ke replied, "Thank you, senior brother." A personal guard had already brought a table and a chair for Xiaoho, and even a cup of hot tea. In front of the blood flag, amidst the wind and snow, he held the teacup and casually drank, his expression naturally calm. Seeing Chen Pipi, Xiaoho frowned slightly, but did not pay much attention to him. Ning Ke sat on the chair, and Sang Sang held the big black umbrella behind the chair. Chen Pipi wanted to bandage his bleeding left palm, but Ning Ke shook his head and refused. In front of the palace gate, the blood flag and the black umbrella were in the wind and snow. The general was drinking hot tea, and Ning Ke was resting. This scene was very strange, even a little absurd, but also very scary. Many horse carriages were hidden in the streets in front of the imperial city, and many people had not arrived at the scene. They were waiting for the final result in their respective mansions. Mr. Second's appearance on the snow bridge is equivalent to the Academy's attitude. The Academy agrees that Ning Ke will challenge Xiaoho, so the Tang military cannot stop this. The third minister of offerings from Qinghe County withdrew his gaze from the falling snow in front of the balcony of the princess mansion. He looked at the two noble royal siblings and said with a smile, "Congratulations, Your Highness." Li Yu's expression was very calm, but there was a hidden worry in the depths of her eyes. Xia Ho was the empress's most powerful helper. It was a good thing for her and Li Huiyuan that he retired. It was even better for Ning Ke to challenge Xia Ho. No matter who won or lost, even if the academy kept silent about it, they would still hate the empress's side. However, she could not be happy, because she, like everyone else in the world, believed that Ning Ke could not defeat Xia Ho. In other words, Ning Ke would definitely die today. She looked at He Mingqi, who had been sitting silently on the other side, and slightly frowned. She asked, "What did Mr. Yi Su say about the nation master going to the small Taoist temple?" He Mingqi shook his head and said, "Even if the West Hill Divine Palace wants to stop this in Chang'an, it is impossible, because the academy has already agreed." The third minister of offerings said lightly, "If your highness is still worried, I may have some means to make the West Hill Divine Palace and the academy hate each other because of this matter." Hearing this, Li Yu's expression gradually turned cold. She slightly narrowed her eyes and warned, "Don't try to use any means to provoke the academy's anger. Neither you nor I can bear it." The third minister of offerings was usually respected in Qinghe Prefecture, like an ancestor. In front of the princess of the Tang Empire, he could consider himself inferior. However, after hearing this, he still felt a little embarrassed. "Your highness is right. Then I will go and have a look," he said expressionlessly. He gently flicked his sleeves and walked out of the balcony. Facing the wind and snow, he left the princess mansion and walked towards the Yanming Lake. The snow kept falling, and it was getting heavier and heavier, falling on Chang'an. No matter how light the snow was, it would eventually fall on the ground, or be swept into the gutters, or accumulate until the next year. When the flowers bloomed in spring, it would be melted by the sun, mixed with dust and withered leaves, and disappear without a trace. This was the truth of heaven and earth. Just as what should be done had to be done, people who should come would come. Many people came to Chang'an accompanied by the wind and snow, including a monk. The monk was wearing a worn-out bamboo hat and a tattered kapak kasaya. His face, which was exposed under the shadow of the bamboo hat, was ordinary, but it had a natural sense of determination. The monk entered the city through the west gate and stood on the snowy long street. It seemed that he did not know where to go. He turned to a porridge shop, took off his bamboo hat and began to ask for directions. He took off his bamboo hat, revealing a head full of sharp green and black hair. He looked as determined as the monk. However, when he asked for directions, the smile on his face was so kind and gentle. It was not accurate to use the word asking for directions. The monk kept his mouth tightly shut, and when he occasionally grinned, only half of his tongue was left. It turned out that he was a mute who could not speak. For Ning Ke and Xia Ho, who were sitting in the wind and snow, the 2 hours were very long. No matter how cold the wind and snow was, their bodies had already warmed up. For His Majesty in the palace and Su Shi on the other side of the snow bridge, the 2 hours were very short. Because the academy's attitude made them feel helpless and they had no time to do more. Just when the 2 hours were about to end, the imperial court finally found a way. The palace gate suddenly opened. Li Qingshan, the nation master of Tang, and Xingjing, the grand secretary of the imperial library, hurried to the field under the escort of dozens of eunuchs and began to read His Majesty's decree. Prince Li Peiyan walked silently at the back of the crowd. Xingjing, the grand secretary of the imperial library, ranked last in the Tang cabinet. However, he was Sangsang's biological father and had a special status. Li Qingshan, the nation master of Tang, was a cultivator and usually did not care about the court affairs. However, he and Ning Ke were old friends. Since Master Yen say, Ning Ke had to call him Uncle Master. His Majesty asked them to read the decree, so he naturally wanted to move them with affection. Sure enough, Ning Ke had to stand up and salute them when he saw them. Xingjing coughed twice and reached out to wipe off the snow on the imperial edict. He said, His Majesty's decree. Everyone in front of the imperial city held their breath and pondered. Xingjing glanced at Prince Li Peiyan and sighed softly. Then he said bitterly, Li Peiyan, Prince Yi of the Tang Empire, requests to be stripped of his title due to the incident in the first year of Tianqi era. Everyone was silent. The people in front of the imperial city could not suppress their shock and looked at His Majesty. Li Peiyan's noble crown was still in the snow between Ning Ke and Xiaohou, and it was about to be buried by the snow. His hair was a little messy and he looked a little embarrassed, but the expression on his face was unusually indifferent. Zheng Jing ignored the reaction of the crowd. He held the imperial edict with both hands and continued to read in a trembling voice. The case of the former Xianwei General Lin Guanyuan's treason is now revoked due to lack of evidence. The names on the imperial edict were read one by one through the Grand Secretary's trembling voice. His voice echoed in the wind and snow and hit the red wall. Xianwei General Lin Guanyuan, Mrs. Lin Guanyuan, Deputy General Sha Gang, Captain Qing Xinzheng. Secretary Lin Hai, subordinate Hu Hua, listening to the names that had long disappeared in history, listening to the imperial edicts that restored officials and conferred posthumous titles, there was dead silence in front of the imperial city. His Majesty's imperial edict did not mention reopening the old case. However, a prince requested to be stripped of his title and all the soldiers involved were rehabilitated. What was the difference between this and reversing the case? People finally understood the meaning of the imperial palace. His Majesty had once thought of reversing the case of the Xianwei general's treason. However, because of the situation in the imperial court and the West Hill Divine Palace, especially the lack of evidence, he did not succeed. Today, the Academy tacitly allowed Ning Ke to challenge Xiaohou, which set a difficult problem for the imperial court. However, His Majesty could not reverse the case without evidence, so he chose this method. Even if it was not to reverse the case, it was still to reverse the case. At least, this could give an explanation to those who died unjustly and Ning Ke today. When the imperial edict was read, Xiaohou stood up from his chair. His Majesty's imperial edict did not involve him, but he gradually frowned and slowly sat back down. Those names were still floating in the wind and snow. Xiaohou knew those names and had seen the people that those names represented. More than a decade ago, he had seen those people die in front of him with his own eyes. He had seen those heads piled up into a hill. Some eyes were closed, some eyes were open, and some eyes were filled with despair, while others were filled with anger. Those names were heard again after more than a decade. In front of the imperial city, they entered his ears. He became more and more silent, and his face became more and more livid. He held the armrest of the chair more and more tightly. He did not feel guilty, nor did he blame himself, nor was he sad. He was just angry. The armrest was reduced to dust, falling from the gaps between his fingers. With anger, it landed on the snow. No one noticed General Xiaohou's emotions at this time. Because His Majesty's imperial edict did not mention him. According to the law, he was no longer General Xiaohou. What he needed to do was to accept it calmly and then leave Chang'an. Everyone's eyes were on Ning Quebec. They knew who His Majesty's imperial edict was for. If they wanted to stop this duel of life and death, they could only hope that Ning Ke would withdraw the challenge invitation. His Majesty reversed the verdict for Lin Guanyuan, rewarded him generously, and favored him for 3 generations, just for this. People in front of the imperial city looked at Ning Ke under the black umbrella and thought that this should be the end. From the moment he heard the name Lin Guanyuan, Ning Ke lowered his head and focused on the thick snow under his feet. He tilted his head and listened to the names on the imperial edict attentively. He had heard of those names before, so he listened very carefully today. But the expression on his face was very complicated, with some gratification, some disappointment, and some self-mockery. The names on the imperial edict were finally read. Grand Secretary Zheng Jing and Nation Master Li Qingshan walked to him and solemnly handed the imperial edict to him. Ning Ke took the imperial edict and remained silent. Li Qingshan looked solemn and said, "His Majesty said that as long as you admit to the previous murders, he will pardon you. After all, it is pardonable. If you think that the removal of the prince's title is not enough to compensate, His Majesty and Her Majesty will apologize to you on behalf of General Xiaohou and compensate you." The nation master spoke very softly and was covered by the wind and snow. Except for himself and Ning Ke, no one could hear him. But people could guess what he was talking about with Ning Quebec. However, Ning Ke made an unexpected decision just when everyone thought that this was the end of the matter and gradually relaxed. Ning Ke put the imperial edict on the chair behind him and looked at Li Qingshan, Xing Jing, and the people in front of the imperial city. He laughed and then raised his hand. He began to clap. In the beginning, his movement was very gentle, but then it became more and more forceful, as if he was beating a wall. The wound on his palm burst open again and blood splashed everywhere. Clap clap. Clap clap clap. Clap 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 clap. The applause became louder and louder. Blood splashed from his palm and then dripped onto his body, his legs, and finally fell into the snow. Seeing this scene, the people in front of the imperial city felt a sense of coldness and horror again. Their bodies gradually became cold with the wind and snow. His Majesty is very kind. The law of the Tang Empire is indeed useful. It is very good to hear the names on the imperial edict resound in Cheng and again. I am very comforted. Ning Ke sighed and said, "It is a pity that some names are still forgotten. I am very sorry." Xing Jing asked nervously, "Who else was left out?" "I will go to the palace to ask His Majesty right away." Ning Ke smiled and said, "I also left out many names in the general's mansion, such as the groom, the cook, the gardener, the maid, and my parents." Xing Jing said in confusion, the first titles were the general and his wife. Ning Ke looked down at the snow under his feet and the blood spots on it. After a long silence, he said, "The general and his wife are not my parents." As soon as he said this, the wind and snow suddenly dispersed. I finally wrote this part. I am very happy. There is one more chapter today. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 472. Since a long time ago, the military had begun to investigate the connection between Ning Ke and those strange murder cases. Although they did not find any evidence, the rumor of his origin had already spread in Cheng'an. Everyone believed that Ning Ke was the son of Xianwei General Lin Guanyuan, the orphan of the massacre. He had been dormant in the world for many years and finally entered the academy. Once he gained power, he would start a bloody revenge. Even His Majesty, Xiahou, and many senior brothers and sisters at the back of the mountain of the academy believed this rumor. Therefore, at this time, when the people in front of the imperial city heard Ning Ke's words, they could not help but be shocked and could not believe it. They thought to themselves, "If you are not Lin Guanyuan's orphan, then why did you do these things?" Xiahou looked at Ning Ke under the black umbrella and frowned. No one knew what he was thinking. Ning Ke looked down at the blood spots that looked like plum blossoms on the snow. He seemed to see the blood spots on the ground in the woodshed 15 years ago, and a strange smile appeared on his face. The wind and snow suddenly scattered and gathered, gradually becoming faster and faster. Ning Ke raised his head, looked at the crowd and asked 3 questions. Why do you all think I'm the general's son? Why must I be the general's son? Why do you all want me to be the general's son? Everyone was still in a state of extreme shock and couldn't answer his question. Ning Ke laughed at himself and said, "Unfortunately, I'm not. My father is not the Xianwei general, not a captain, not a subordinate officer, not even a clerk. He is just a gatekeeper of the general's mansion, and a gatekeeper of the second gate. Even so, he doesn't get much. My mother was naturally not the general's wife. She was just a lowly servant girl. Although she had fed the young master and could enter the inner residence, she was still just a servant girl. Your Majesty has reversed the verdict for the general. I am very gratified. This is my true feeling, because the general and his wife were good people. They died unjustly, but I am very regretful that I did not hear my parents' names." He looked at the crowd in front of the imperial city and said, "This is a very natural thing. My parents were originally unremarkable people, and their names were also very unremarkable. My father is an orphan. The general gave him the surname Lin. His name is Lin Tao. My mother didn't even have a name. She was sold to Cheng and from Hebei County. She was called Li Sanyang from her childhood until her death because she vaguely remembered that she was the third child in her family. The blood continued to flow down Ning Kei's palm onto the snow. His expression was very calm, and so was his narration. It was not indifference, but true calmness. However, this unemotional calmness made everyone who saw Ning Kei's face feel a chill rising from the soles of their feet, and then their whole bodies froze. The calmness was frightening. Sang Sang was not afraid. She just felt what he was feeling at this moment. She felt his sadness and the coldness in his body and mind. She subconsciously reached out to hold his hand, wanting to give him some warmth. I know, that's what's written in the books. Ning Kei said calmly. The prince who was robbed of the throne left his hometown and returned to take revenge. A young master of a minister who was framed by a treacherous official escaped. Many years later, he became the top scholar and was favored by His Majesty. Then, he reopened the case. He looked at the crowd and asked seriously, but why must the protagonist of every revenge story be a prince? Is the son of a gatekeeper and a maidservant not qualified to take revenge? Faced with this calm but powerful question, the people in front of the imperial city could only remain silent. Xingjing wanted to say something, but he could not open his mouth. Li Qingshan sighed softly. That's what's written in the books, and that's what people think. I know that I can't blame anyone, and it's stupid to feel sorry for oneself. But I still hate this kind of thinking. Just like a dozen years ago. Ning Kei looked at Xiaohou and said, that day, I took the young master to play on the street, as I often did, because he treated me as a good friend. That's a bit too much. Anyway, the housekeeper wanted to preserve the general's bloodline, so he took me to the mansion of the official of council across the street. Hearing this, Xingjing the Grand Secretary's expression slightly stiffened. He thought of the scene across the street when his wife, who was still a concubine, gave birth to a daughter and the scene of a river of blood across the street. Ning Kei continued, when you led the troops into the general's mansion, I was hiding in the woodshed of the official of council's mansion with the young master and the housekeeper. Xiaohou said gloomily, my subordinates finally chased us to the woodshed and saw 2 dead bodies. At that time, I was sure that Lin Guanyuan's son was dead, so I was very confused about your identity. Now I'm not confused anymore, but I'm curious about what you did at that time. Ning Kei looked at the wind and snow around, as if he was recalling something. He smiled and said, there's nothing new under Haotian. It's just the same old stories. If the general's son wanted to live, the gatekeeper's son had to die. They were both 4-year-old boys who were badly mutilated and changed their clothes. Who could recognize them? The housekeeper thought that there was no need to be vigilant against a 4-year-old boy, so he looked at me in a daze. His eyes were filled with apologies, sympathy, and sadness. At that moment, I knew what he was going to do. He spread his hands and said with a smile, isn't that what's written in the book? Then the smile on his face gradually faded. He looked at Xiaohou, Xingjing, Li Qingshan, and all the people he could see. He asked expressionlessly, but why? Why should I do what is written in the book? Why the general's son wanted to live, but the gatekeeper's son had to die? Why should I die? The wind and snow fell on the palace gate. Everyone was silent. No one could answer this question, so it was quiet. Only Ning Kei's voice was still floating in the snow, and it was floating higher and higher, colder and colder. I'm just the gatekeeper's son. But I want to live. I want to live. Ning Kei's voice was calm and firm. He talked about his thoughts in the past, as if he was talking about the eternal truth that the sun must rise every day and the water must flow down. He continued, so when the housekeeper tried to trick me into taking off my clothes and taking the chopper himself, I grabbed the chopper first and stabbed it into his stomach. I stabbed him more than once. Ning Ke recalled what happened in the past and said with a frown, "It seemed to be 5 times. Because I didn't have enough strength, I couldn't stab him deeply enough, so I had to stab him a few more times. But I don't know why the housekeeper didn't scream. He just looked at me in horror, as if he was looking at a devil. All these years, I've been thinking whether he was too scared to speak or he didn't want to alarm the people outside the woodshed." After a moment of silence, he continued, "The young master, that is, the son of the general, did not know what happened at that time. He only saw the housekeeper, whom he had always loved the most, lying in a pool of blood. He rushed towards me as if he had gone mad. He wanted to hit me and bite me. He shook his head and said, I was also very panicked at that time. I waved the chopper wildly and somehow cut his neck. Then he covered his neck and fell back on the woodpile. The blood in the young master's neck spurted out from the gaps between his fingers. I wanted to cover it for him, but I couldn't. In the end, his blood condensed into paste on my fingers." Ning Ke raised his head and looked at the people in the snow. After a long silence, he shook his head and said, "It wasn't manslaughter. Maybe I wanted to kill him at that time." He looked at Xia Ho and said with a smile, "Because only if he died, people like you and His Highness would no longer care about me, the gatekeeper's son." The world was shrouded in the wind and snow, shrouded in a dead silence. The snowflakes drifted to Ning Ke's face and touched his smile, which seemed to be even colder. It was a smile that seemed gentle but was actually extremely cold. People looked at the smile on Ning Ke's face and were shocked speechless. They felt an unprecedented chill. They seemed to see the scene in the woodshed of the official of council's mansion more than a decade ago. A 4-year-old boy, holding a rusty chopper, stood in front of the 2 corpses. His face was full of despair and fear, and his body kept trembling, as if he could collapse at any time. But the boy didn't collapse. Now, the boy was standing in the wind and snow, standing in front of the majestic palace, standing in front of people, telling the story of that long ago. The stories in the books were often written like that. The story he told was not in the books. On the first anniversary of the night, I finally told one of the stories I wanted to tell the most in this story. I feel very happy. 80 clock, crooked. 55373, let's chat. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 473. On the precipice of the back mountain of the academy. The headmaster wore a black robe and sat on the edge of the cliff, looking at Cheng and city in the distance. It was snowing heavily. From afar, it looked like Haotian was giving salt to the human world. 15 years ago, I sat here and looked at the woodshed of the official of council's mansion. The headmaster said, I saw your youngest brother walk out of the woodshed with a machete in his hand. I saw him grab a rope and hide in the well. I saw him climb over the wall and walk into the crowd. I saw him leave Cheng and city. It was as if I saw your youngest uncle's appearance a long time ago. Eldest brother stood aside and asked, how did youngest brother and youngest uncle resemble each other? The headmaster shook his head and said, I don't know. Maybe it's the strong desire for freedom? I can understand why you said that about youngest uncle. Eldest brother asked confusedly, but what does the tragedy that youngest brother encountered have to do with freedom? The headmaster said, the so-called freedom is the right to choose. Choose to live, choose to die, or choose not to choose. Back then, your junior brother chose to pick up that hatchet and kill his housekeeper and his best playmate. At that moment, he took his first step towards freedom. Eldest brother said honestly, Teacher, I don't understand. The headmaster said, you are the clearest stream in the world. You have been flowing freely in the mountains all these years. Maybe you have encountered dangerous shoals and reefs, but you have never encountered a real fork in the river. You have never encountered the choice that your youngest brother faced. No one is qualified to judge whether the choice your junior brother made back then was right or wrong. However, the fact that he was able to make this choice is already extraordinary, Just like your junior uncle back then, no matter what kind of situation they face, they will only do what they want to do. Eldest brother said, that's why you want to take youngest brother in? The headmaster said with emotion, in the spring, when I met your youngest brother in the building of pines and cranes and talked to him in the hut, I found that he was different from your youngest uncle. I felt sorry at that time. But that's how the world is. How can two identical leaves be found? The headmaster looked at the snow clouds in the distance and Chang and city shrouded in the wind and snow. He said with relief, but today, your youngest brother's choice still surprised me. I never thought that he would have the courage to challenge Xiaoho. I like the clumsiness in his choice. He turned to look at his eldest disciple and said with a smile, among the academy disciples, you are the clumsiest, so I like you the most. But in some aspects, you really have to learn from Jun Mo and youngest brother. Eldest brother solemnly accepted the advice, but looking at the wind and snow in the distance, he could not suppress the worry in his heart. After hesitating for a moment, he said, if youngest brother really loses to Xiaoho, what should I do? The words, if and really, in this sentence were very meaningful. This meant that in the eyes of the eldest brother of the academy, Ning Ke and Xiaoho were not powerless to fight. I don't believe in heaven, nor do I believe in fate. I only believe in myself. The headmaster glanced at the dark winter sky and said, everyone can only believe in themselves. This is your youngest brother's own choice. It is his mockery and contempt for the heaven's way and destiny. Therefore, he needs nothing but a fair environment. The dead silence in front of the imperial city lasted for a long time. The increasingly violent wind and snow covered the blood flag, making the big black umbrella sway slightly, and the people's faces seemed to be frozen. Li Qingshan, the nation master of Tang, looked at Ning Ke with a complicated expression and said, is that it? Ning Ke did not say anything. Li Qingshan sighed softly and shook his head helplessly. He said, His Majesty said that if you insist on continuing this duel, then you must first hand over the item. He reached out his hand to Ning Ke and said, you know what His Majesty said. Ning Ke raised his eyebrows and asked, why? Li Qingshan said, is this a personal grudge? Ning Ke said, yes. Li Qingshan said, since it is a personal grudge, how can you use the national weapon? Then he said seriously, if this duel is over and you are lucky enough to survive, then I will return the item to you. Ning Ke looked at the thick snow under his feet. After a moment of silence, he took out an item tightly wrapped in cloth from his arms, but he did not hand it to Li Qingshan. Li Qingshan frowned slightly and said, don't you even believe in me? I have always believed in no one but myself. Sorry. Ning Ke said and then handed the item wrapped in cloth to Chen Pipi behind him. Li Qingshan smiled bitterly and no longer cared about what happened in the venue, walking towards the imperial palace. The people in front of the palace gate did not know what Ning Ke took out from his arms, so they could not help but be curious. Xiaoho clearly felt the faint fluctuation of aura from that item. He frowned slowly and looked at Ning Ke and said, so the array I is really in your hands. No wonder you are so bold to challenge me. Ning Ke said, I have said before that I still have many powerful means. Xiaoho slowly stroked the armrest of the chair, as if he did not notice that there was nothing there. He said, now that the array I has been taken, you still insist on killing me? Ning Ke said, you have killed a lot of people, and so have I. People like us should be very clear that there are many ways to kill people. Xiaoho said indifferently, you know you will definitely die, but you still insist on killing me. Is it for revenge? Can a 4-year-old boy have such a long memory? Can you remember the faces of your parents? I don't believe it at all. I think you just can't get rid of the psychological shadow of that year. Hearing this, Ning Ke said, I have to admit that my hands are very uncomfortable with young master's blood. I can't wash them clean no matter how I wash them. My fingers are always sticky. Maybe I do have a psychological shadow. I used a hatchet to kill people for the first time, and then I got used to using a knife. He looked at Xiaoho and said, but so what? What's the point of saying this? Xia Ho slightly raised his eyebrows and showed a look of ridicule and contempt on his face. He said, at least it can prove that your revenge is not as great and righteous as you think. Great and righteous? Ning Ke shook his head and said, after escaping from Chang'an, I have imagined countless times over the years. One day, I will meet an extraordinary person in the mountains and inherit a peerless skill. What will I say before I break into the military camp to kill you? I will ask you why you are so cruel and murderous. I will say that killing you today is to seek justice for the ghosts in the general's mansion, the burnt corpses in the villages in the Yen territory, and all the innocent people who died. The list is very long, and I added a very good friend to it at the end. Speaking of this, he looked at Xia Ho and said with slight mockery, these are some very awe-inspiring and righteous words, but what does it have to do with me? The cold wind and snow attacked his body. Ning Ke covered his mouth with his fist and coughed twice. Then he spat a thick phlegm into the snow. The yellow phlegm was very eye-catching in the clean snow. I have killed no less people than you, and I have also done many evil things that others can't imagine. My hands are never clean, and I am not a messenger of justice. He looked at Xia Ho and said, no matter how many innocent people you kill, it has nothing to do with me. As long as it has nothing to do with me, I can even applaud you. But since you have killed my family, I will naturally kill you. This is a matter of course, and I don't need any other reason. Xia Ho was silent for a long time, and suddenly said, a little interesting. Then he stood up from the chair. It was as if an indestructible mountain had suddenly appeared in the snowstorm. Come and kill me. He finally said, or be killed by me and end your painful life. The city of Chang'an at dusk was like falling into the eternal night. The thick snow clouds covered the last afterglow and the sky full of stars. It was dark beside Yanming Lake, and only the distant torches illuminated the falling snow, turning the dense and whistling snow into the human world starlight. Xia Ho looked at the closed courtyard door in front of him expressionlessly. He reached back and took the military flag from his bodyguard. He walked to the front of the courtyard door, holding the military flag in his right hand and pointing it down. His movement was very casual. The ground in front of the courtyard door was hard stone. When the flagpole fell, the stone ground was broken into pieces, splashing countless gravel, and the end of the flagpole was deeply inserted into the mud. Xia Ho slowly loosened his palm. The flagpole was firm as if it was born from the ground. The blood-red military flag fluttered in the sky full of snow, engulfing all the night. This blood-red royal general flag had accompanied Xia Ho for many years. Whether it was fighting with the Yen Kingdom army or the cavalry of the left king's palace, this flag had always been flying in the northeast border military of the Tang Empire. Over the past few decades, this blood flag had never fallen. Just like the powerful man under the blood flag. The bodyguards at the periphery of Yanming Lake, the vigilant ministers, and the local government runners of Chang and local government who maintained order, all looked at the blood flag in the night and had a strong feeling. Tonight, this blood-red flag would still not fall. Xia Ho walked up the stone steps. Then he pushed open the courtyard door. So he walked into the night. Ning Ke was not in the house by Yanming Lake. He and Sang Sang were standing on Yanming Mountain on the south bank, overlooking the distant opposite bank. Sang Sang held the big black umbrella to block the increasingly violent snow. In the eyes of the world, Ning Ke's most powerful cultivation state was talisman and arrow. To fight with Xia Ho, a powerhouse at the peak state of martial arts, it was natural for him to keep a distance. Although Xia Ho did not know where Ning Ke was at this time, he could guess it. However, as proud and confident as he was, he did not care about it at all. But tonight, the wind and snow were strong and the night sky covered the stars. In the cold winter, Yanming Lake was like a frozen inkstone. No matter how sharp Ning Ke's senses were, he could not see the scene on the opposite bank. If he could not see, then how could the primordial 13 arrows hit the enemy? That's all for today. I need to sort it out and delete some. 2 chapters tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 474. This snow seems to be unfair to me, but it is actually unfair to Xiaoho. Ning Ke looked at the other side of the lake and the snow on the lake. He shook his head and continued, His Majesty took away the array I pestle, which naturally doesn't make me happy. But it is fair. My cultivation state is far lower than Xiaoho's, so it seems unfair. But in fact, I have prepared for 15 years, and he doesn't know that there is a person like me in the world who has been watching him silently. So the unfairness here is even. As long as this battle is limited to me and him, then I will admit that it is fair. Sang Sang held the handle of the big black umbrella tightly and shrank her body to ensure that the umbrella would not be blown away by the violent snow. She whispered, Young master, are you worried that someone will intervene? After all, Xia Ho is a visiting professor of Haotian Taoism besides being a general of the empire. I always feel that someone will interrupt this battle. I did feel something when I held the array I pestle. Ning Ke thought of his peers in the academy and said, But I am not worried, because this is Chang'an and not other places. As long as the academy is still in the south of the city, no one is qualified to intervene. Perhaps some forces wanted to intervene in this battle, but more people were just silently waiting for the battle to begin by the Yanming Lake, such as Yi Su who had left the small Taoist temple. The best place to watch a battle was, of course, a high place. At this time, he was on the city wall of Chang'an, and his plain white robe was fluttering in the night snow. Many people thought that the Westhill Divine Palace did not want to see the battle between Xiaoho and Ning Quebec. In fact, the envoy of the Divine Hall had indeed raised objections to the Imperial Palace, but he, who came to Chang'an on behalf of Haotian Taoism, could ignore the Divine Hall's attitude. Although he also wanted to see Xiaoho retire safely, he did not mind the battle happening. Because no matter how Yi Su deduced, he could not imagine that Ning Ke could win. It was good that Xiaoho could win. It was better that Xiaoho killed Ning Ke and offended the academy. Because then, he could no longer stay in the Tang Empire and retire peacefully, nor could he waver on the wall. He could only pledge his loyalty to Haotian Taoism. Although the Dao Sect's idea is good, we must first ensure that Xiaoho can win. A voice rang out from the top of the city wall. This person spoke very slowly, but his voice was still very clear in the snowstorm. It seemed to be able to calm people's hearts. Eldest brother walked to Yi Su's side and looked in the direction of the dark Yanming Lake below the city wall. Yi Su said, We just met in the morning, and you're here again? Eldest brother said, Yes, I'm here to take a look. Yi Su asked, What are you here to see? Eldest brother looked at Yi Su and said with a smile, Now that your sword style is calm, there is no one else but Mr. Liu Bai who can beat you in Chang'an. That's why I came to see you. Looking at you is actually looking at you. Yi Su looked at the falling snow in front of the city wall and said expressionlessly, No one in Chang'an is my match, but there is an academy outside the city. Tonight, the wind and snow were furious. Many people were sitting peacefully in the snow. The third minister of offerings of Qinghe County sat in the winter forest on the east bank of Yanming Lake. The night snow fell from the sky. He looked indifferent, as if he did not feel the coldness around him. Considering the interests of the Qinghe County families and Her Highness, he could not allow anyone to disturb this battle. However, he had a feeling earlier, so he came to the forest and waited silently. A monk walked slowly in the night snow. It was dark in the forest, but the monk's cotton kasaya and the bamboo hat on his head could be clearly seen, naturally revealing a sense of righteousness. The third minister of offerings looked at the monk walking in the wind and snow and frowned slightly. A few years ago, he was already a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state. However, at this moment, he found that he could not see through the monk's depth. He could not help but be extremely vigilant and have a desire to fight. When powerhouses confronted each other, they fought for a moment. There was no need for any verbal probing, nor was there a need to ask about the origin of the mountain. The third minister of offerings reached behind him and pulled out the hilt of his sword. The sword rubbed against the edge of the scabbard, making a very subtle sound, like snowflakes falling on a thick layer of snow. However, the sword was only pulled out halfway before it was forced to stop. The third minister of offerings' eyebrows gradually rose. His hand holding the hilt of his sword trembled slightly, and all the cultivation in his body spurted out. However, the sword in the scabbard behind him did not continue to be pulled out. Instead, it slowly returned to the scabbard. The sound of the sword rubbing against the scabbard was as quiet as falling snow, but it made his heart palpitate. The monk wearing the bamboo hat walked slowly in the wind and snow and was only a few feet away from him. The third minister of offerings' body was extremely stiff. His hand holding the hilt of his sword trembled like a withered branch in the snow. Looking at the monk, there was only fear left in his usually proud eyes. The monk did not make any move. There was no change in the aura of heaven and earth in the snow forest. He just walked slowly, and yet a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state could not pull out his sword. The third minister of offerings was extremely shocked. He could not imagine any cultivator in the world who could have such a skill. In a flash, he guessed the monk's origin and his pupils shrank. Someone from the Xiankong temple? The third priest looked at the monk who was getting closer and closer. He looked at the monk's gentle and determined eyes. His stiff body began to tremble slightly in fear. He let out a muffled groan and his face suddenly turned red. His skinny fingers suddenly spread out and escaped the traces of the aura of heaven and earth floating in the snow forest. He wanted to escape from the monk's control. The monk raised his right palm in front of him. He bent his index finger slightly and made an unknown emblematic gesture. The wind and snow in the winter forest suddenly became stronger. Thousands of snowflakes seemed to fall on the third minister of offerings of Qinghe County. The snowflakes sensed the supreme power of the monk's emblematic gesture and sank into the third minister of offerings' clothes. They turned into countless invisible snow ropes and tied him up. The monk glanced at him, his eyes full of benevolence and pity. Then he started walking again, stepping on the thick snow, walking past him, as if he was walking towards the lakeside outside the winter forest. The third minister of offerings sat alone in the snow. He could not move at all. His flushed cheeks had already become extremely pale. His eyes were filled with shame and fear. He was the respected ancestor of Qinghe County. After his cultivation entered the knowing destiny state, he became even more arrogant and confident. He did not even have much respect for the legendary unknown place like the academy. On this snowy night, he finally met a monk from the unknown place. He finally understood that a legend was just a legend. In front of the monk, even a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state did not have the slightest qualification to be arrogant. The third minister of offerings thought of how he had boasted shamelessly in the princess mansion. He said that he wanted to create some disputes between the academy and Haotian Taoism. Now, he was tied up in the snow by the monk's emblematic gesture. He could not help but feel endless shame and wished that he could die. On the high city wall, Yi Su waved his hand to disperse the snowflakes within 50 feet in front of him. He looked at the dark forest by the Yanming Lake and said coldly, "That idiot from Qinghe County is extremely stupid. Even a small stem borer wants to be involved in the torrent. It's really disgusting." The eldest brother smiled and did not say anything. Yi Su said, "I wanted to kill that idiot. But since the mute has taken action, forget it." The eldest brother shook his head and said, "How can I watch you violate the laws of the Tang Empire?" Yi Su smiled slightly when he heard the words, "the laws of the Tang Empire." Eldest brother looked at the shore of Yanming Lake and thought of the monk who was walking through the winter forest to the lakeside. He said, "The battle between youngest brother and General Xiahou is probably a grand event in the eyes of many people in the world. That is why you came to Chang'an. I just hope that nothing happens to youngest brother." Yi Su said, "You know that I came to Chang, and not because of this battle, but because of Ning, Quebec. That mute is naturally here for Ning Quebec. The eldest brother was very clear about what Yi Su wanted to say, but he remained silent and did not answer. Yi Su looked at the Yenming Lake and suddenly said with emotion, "Those people who appeared around the Black Line 15 years ago, except for Tang, all of us are here." The eldest brother said, "Actually, Tang is here too. The injuries on General Xiahou were all caused by him. So even though he did not come, his fists did." Yi Su said, "That makes sense. But even if Xiahou has countless fists left by Tang, in my opinion, Ning Ke still has no chance in this cross-state battle. I know what you want to say and what you are worried about. I respect youngest brother, so I will not do anything." The eldest brother smiled and said, "Of course, I know that if youngest brother knew what the academy is thinking, he would definitely cry and beg me not to respect him." Yi Su said, "What does Mr. Second mean by stopping Su Shi on the snow bridge?" The eldest brother said, "It means fairness." Yi Su said, "Xiahou is far more powerful than Ning Quebec. Does the academy think this is also fair?" The eldest brother said, "Teacher once taught us that fairness is the intention and has nothing to do with strength. As long as both sides are willing to do so and accept the rules, then it is fair." Yi Su was silent for a long time as he thought of the words of the headmaster of the academy. Then he looked at the night forest by the Yenming Lake and frowned slightly. He said, "If that mute wants to speak, there are few people in this world who can stop him." Yi Su turned to look at him and asked, "Jun Mo is stopping Su Shi, and you are looking at me. Then who can stop him? I will not stop him. And the moment he speaks, even I cannot stop him. Do we need to alarm the headmaster of the academy?" The eldest brother looked at the lake in the cold winter night and frowned in silence. The snow was dancing. The monk walked in the forest towards the Yenming Lake. 15 years ago, in front of the Black Line, he smiled slightly, chewed his tongue and swallowed it. He never spoke again and had been practicing the silent meditation ever since. Tonight, he stepped into the mortal world again. No one knew if he would speak or what he would say. People only knew that he had been silent for 15 years. Once he opened his mouth, the Buddha's voice would be as clear as thunder. Even Yi Su, the powerful successor of the Jishou Abbey, did not want to hear the first sentence he would say. Who would talk to the monk? Did the headmaster of the academy really need to come down the mountain? At this moment, a very thin layer of snow fell from the night forest. The snow was extremely thin, so thin that it was translucent, like a cicada's wing. "I'm going to pick up the leader and then go back to my parents' home with her. The second chapter will be updated very late. I have to report to everyone. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 475. It was windy and snowy in the forest at night. However, the seemingly light snow was not blown away by the howling night wind, nor did it disappear into the dense snow. Instead, it fell from the sky alone and arrogantly, ignoring the surrounding wind and its companions. It slowly floated down and landed on the shoulder of the third minister of offerings. The third minister of offerings of Qinghe County was bound by the monk's emblematic gesture. He sat cross-legged in the snow and could not move at all. He could only watch the thin snow fall on his shoulder and could not help but feel confused. When the thin snow fell, the monk stopped walking toward the lakeside. His straw sandals sunk deep into the thick snow. Then he turned around and looked at the thin snow in silence. Suddenly, there was a rustling sound in the forest. The sound was like sharp pieces of ice rubbing against each other. Accompanied by the wind and snow, it was naturally mournful and sounded like the chirping of cicadas. Cicadas were creatures of summer and would be silent in the autumn wind. In this context, cold cicadas were silent. However, the wind and snow were cold tonight, and there seemed to be countless cicadas in the forest. Those cicadas hid behind the branches, in the upturned bark, hanging between the spider webs, and sitting in the ice and snow. They watched the falling snow and the monk in the wind and snow, chirping wantonly. The cicadas kept chirping. The forest was full of cold cicadas. The chirping of the cicadas in the forest became more and more intense and mournful. The thick snow on the branches was shaken and fell down. However, there seemed to be two large and invisible cicada wings above the forest by the lake, covering the whole sky and preventing the chirping of the cicadas from spilling out of the forest. The mournful chirping of the cicadas was colder than the snow and more elusive than the night wind. It sounded everywhere, returned to silence, and revived everywhere. Finally, it fell into the ears of the monk. The chirping of the cicadas in the forest seemed to be indifferently saying, "Repent and you will be saved." The monk listened to the increasingly mournful chirping of the cicadas, and his expression became more and more solemn. His name was Qi Nian. He came from the Xiankong Temple and was a powerful world wayfarer of the Buddhism sect. Because of the records in the temple, he came to Chang and to see the legendary son of Yama. He was even ready to kill that person even if he had to face the academy. Ever since he started to practice silent meditation, his Zen heart and willpower had become firmer and firmer. Even the countless powerhouses in Chang and the mountain of the academy in the south of the city could not move him. Logically speaking, no sound should be able to stop his footsteps. But these cicadas were different. Because he knew that these cicadas represented a person. He was the most mysterious person in the world, and could even be said to be the most terrifying person in the world. Even if the chief preaching monk of the Xiankong Temple was here, he would have to treat the cicadas with the utmost caution. Qi Nian's expression was solemn, even with the respect that a junior should have. But his eyes were still firm, and he slowly pointed to the Yanming Lake behind him. He used this action to tell the person behind the cicada that his higan was over there. The third minister of offerings of Qinghe County was tied up by the snow rope made by the emblematic gesture of the Buddhism sect and could not move at all. But he could see, hear, and hear the mournful chirping of cicadas in the forest. Looking at the thin snow on his shoulder, his face became paler and paler, and his expression became more and more frightened. He was a grand cultivator of the knowing destiny state, and he knew many secrets of the cultivation world in the Qinghe County book collection. Although he was not sure, he had vaguely guessed the identity of the person in the forest. To cause the cicadas to cry in such a snowy night, and to make the Vedanta of the Xiankong Temple so solemn, it could only be the most mysterious master of the devil's doctrine in the world, the 23-year cicada cultivation. After the front gate of the devil's doctrine was destroyed, the force that had once set off bloody storms in the world had withered. But no one dared to ignore the current master of the devil's doctrine. For many years, no one had seen the master of the devil's doctrine, or even heard of him. So the master became the most mysterious legend in the cultivation world. Rumor had it that the master of the devil's doctrine was possessed by the devil while practicing the 23-year cicada cultivation and had already turned into a pile of bones. But some people also said that the master of the devil's doctrine was hiding somewhere in the world, watching the world indifferently, and might appear at any time to summon the wind and rain again. But no matter what, no one in the cultivation world would forget this person. Even those who believed that he was dead, in fact, were frightened and uneasy at night. They always felt that one day, the master of the devil's doctrine would reappear in front of the world at a moment that no one could imagine. It was indeed a moment that no one could imagine. At least it was a moment that the third minister of offerings of Qinghe County could not imagine. Just before the decisive battle between Ning Ke of the Academy and General Xiaohe, the world wayfarers of Taoism and Buddhism sects arrived in Chang'an. 23-year cicada cultivation actually reappeared in the world. The third minister of offerings was terrified. But then, he thought that the master of the devil's doctrine was confronting the Vedanta of Xiankong Temple, and he thought that he might have a chance to survive. His eyes rolled subconsciously. His eyes turned slightly, and out of the corner of his eye, he saw the snow on his shoulder that was as thin as a cicada's wing. Then he remembered that he had forgotten something in the legend. According to the legend, the master of the devil's doctrine did not kill many people because he disdained to kill ordinary people. He thought that only grand cultivators in the knowing destiny state were qualified to be killed by him. According to the legend, The reason why the master of the devil's doctrine was the most mysterious person in the world was that he would kill everyone who had heard the sound of cicadas. The third minister of offerings was in the knowing destiny state, and he had heard the sound of cicadas tonight. The third minister of offerings understood this, and then he died. The snowflake that was as thin as a cicada's wing flapped its wings and gently wedged itself into his old neck. Blood spurted out from his neck and sprayed into the wind and snow, making a hissing sound. It was also like the sound of cicadas. The sound of cicadas was the sound of the vibration of the drum of cicadas. It could vibrate thousands of times in an instant. Therefore, it could tear silk when it was clear, make people cry when it was sad, and make them feel sad when it was bleak. The sound of blood splashing was the vibration of the friction between the blood and the wound. It was similar to the sound of cicadas, so the sound was similar and could be equally sad. The mute monk turned around and looked at the third minister of offerings of Qinghe County, who was sitting cross-legged in the deep snow. He frowned slightly, knowing that this was a warning from the man in the forest. He was a disciple of Buddhism. He could kill people, but he did not want to. That was why he used the emblematic gesture of the Buddhism sect to bind the minister of offerings. However, he did not expect that he would become the accomplice of the powerhouse from the devil's doctrine. The monk knew why the 23-year cicada cultivation reappeared in the world, and why it used the sound of cicadas to stop him from going to Yanming Lake. Because Xia Ho was a traitor of the devil's doctrine, and he was someone that the 23-year cicada cultivation had to kill. If the master of the devil's doctrine was really dead, then it would be fine. But since he was still alive, he had to kill Xia Ho, or watch him die. The master of the devil's doctrine had probably endured for many years because of the academy and the imperial court of the Tang Empire. Now that the academy had decided to kill Xia Ho, how could he allow others to intervene? The 23-year cicada cultivation might be afraid of the headmaster of the academy. But he would never be afraid of the Xiankong Temple or the Jishou Abbey. The mute monk could understand the intention of the sound of cicadas, but it did not mean that he could accept it. The Buddhism sect had always been called the Outer Way by the Haotian Taoism sect, but it belonged to the righteous way after all. Although he knew that the powerhouse from the devil's doctrine in the forest was unfathomable, how could someone as strong-willed as him stop? He was Qin Yan, the successor of the Xiankong Temple. He began to get angry, but it was anger. It was not coquettishness, nor anger. The monk still pressed his lips tightly together, and his eyes were firm. His hands were constantly changing in front of the cotton kasaya, and in a moment, they formed a cold emblematic gesture. It was the brightest and most powerful emblematic gesture of the Buddhism sect, the Akalanatha gesture. The two seemingly ordinary fingers in front of the old kasaya curled up like orchids, and the majestic aura followed the direction of the emblematic gesture and scattered around the snow forest. Silently, the snow and the forest suddenly scattered into the sky, and suddenly the wind and snow in the air stopped. The sound of cicadas, which seemed to be everywhere in the night forest, also stopped. However, then the sound of cicadas sounded again, and this time it was brighter and more violent. It seemed that a person was laughing loudly. The wind and snow in the forest became stronger, and the snow fell even faster. The snow that had just been shaken up from the ground instantly covered the ground again, and the snowflakes in the air were shooting at Qin Yan's body. Qin Yan's expression did not change. He lightly stepped on the snow with his straw sandals, and bounced his right calf to hit the bend of his left knee. Then he sat on the snow like a half-snow lotus. The flying snowflakes were like countless cicadas, whizzing and hitting Qin Yan's body. There seemed to be an invisible barrier on the surface of Qin Yan's body. When the snowflakes were half an inch away from his body, they could no longer move forward. However, the snowflakes did not fall, but stuck to the surface of his body like cotton. In a moment, his kasaya was covered with snow, and only his face and hands with the Akalanatha gesture were outside. He looked like a snowman. Qin Yan looked into the depths of the night forest and saw the frost on his eyelashes. The muscles on his cheeks twitched slightly, and he seemed to be hesitating whether to say something or not. He had practiced the silent meditation for 15 years, and he was finally going to speak tonight? At this moment, a voice suddenly came from the depths of the night forest. That voice was so quiet and peaceful. It was a sharp contrast with the irritated cicadas in the forest. However, the words that came out of such a tranquil voice were so cold. If you speak, I will make 100,000 mutes in the world. Hearing this, the monk was furious. He opened his eyes wide and looked into the depths of the night forest. The frost on his eyelashes evaporated, and the snow on his body turned into warm water and dripped down. He knew that even if he spoke tonight, he might not be able to defeat that person. But that person could definitely set off a bloody storm in the world. If he was facing Mr. First, Mr. Second, or even the headmaster of the academy, the monk could ignore them, because he knew that the academy would not be so shameless. But that person was 23 years cicada cultivation. That person could do anything. So he was angry, but he still could not speak. After saying this, the person in the depths of the night forest did not speak again. But Qi Nian knew that he was still here, because the cicadas were still chirping. The monk could not speak, nor could he sigh. He could only sigh softly in his heart, and then disperse the Akalanatha seal. He put his palms together to guard his heart, and then slowly closed his eyes. The snowflakes continued to fall like cicadas, covering the monk's body and covering his facial features, turning the successor of Xiankong Temple into a snowman in the night forest. The snow that had been falling for a whole day and night suddenly became lighter at this time. The chirping of cicadas in the forest gradually became weaker, but it became more and more sad. Cold cicadas were sad. Facing the winter lake, the heavy snow had just stopped. Let me be excited. This is also the picture that I have been writing for a whole year. Maybe half of the fun of writing a novel is here. Tomorrow is Saturday. See you the day after tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 476. Beside the Yanming Lake, the mountains on the south bank and the snow forest on the east bank were all quiet. There was no sound, let alone the sound of cicadas. On the city wall, eldest brother and Yisu looked through the heavy snow and fell on the forest. Their expressions were slightly strange, as if they felt something was happening there. However, they did not have the energy to pay attention to what was happening in the snow forest, because they saw the blood flag fluttering in front of the Yanming Lake house. Xia Ho pushed the door open and entered. The courtyard door was a little new, as if it had been repaired not long ago. Xia Ho pushed the door open and entered the dark courtyard. He suddenly heard the sound of cicadas, and his body could not help but stiffen. During the day in the imperial palace, he also vaguely heard the sound of cicadas coming from the dancing snowflakes in front of the hall. He was sure that it was an auditory hallucination, but at this time, although the sound was still unreal, it seemed to be a little real. The indifferent expression on Xia Ho's face did not change at all. He slightly raised his eyebrows and looked more violent. He steadily stepped over the threshold and walked through the corridor to the main hall. There was a short pause in the snow, and then it flew more violently. Thick clouds covered the sky full of stars, and the wind and snow dimmed the lights in Chang'an. It was so dark beside the Yanming Lake that one could not see his fingers in front of him, but Xia Ho could see everything clearly. There were a few winter plums planted under the stone steps. For some reason, the plum branches were scattered, and fresh stubble could be seen under the snow. It seemed that they had been eaten by some elegant animals. There was a pot of green plant in the house. Even in the cold winter, the plant was still growing vigorously. Its branches and leaves were plump and green, which made the yellow soil in the pot even more boring. The thick and straight black beam on the roof was slightly deformed. It should have been hit by some kind of impact, and there were two very small cracks on it. It did not seem to affect safety, but it was still a little scary to look at. On the side of the unique display shelf, there was an oil lamp. The oil lamp was made of celadone, and the lamp string was white. When it was not lit, it was also a very beautiful work of art. Ning Ke had spent countless taels of silver on this house by the Yanming Lake, and Mr. Qi had spent a lot of effort on it. Moreover, it had been bought by Her Majesty and Liu, so it was extraordinary. Compared with those famous gardens in Qinghe County, it was not inferior. Even the inconspicuous things were worth appreciating. Xia Ho was a general and would never be sentimental about the changing seasons. Naturally, he had no interest in this aspect. However, in the face of a great battle, his gaze on the plum bushes, black beams, bonsai, and oil lamp was so focused. In fact, he did not look at the plum bushes, the black beams, the bonsai, or the oil lamp. He was looking at the yellow paper peeking out from the snow on the plum trees, the yellow paper stuck between the cracks of the black beams, the yellow paper in the bonsai, the yellow paper under the celadon lamp. In this world, there was a kind of paper that was usually yellowish. It was called fu paper. There were talisman papers everywhere in the house by the Yanming Lake. This was a residence made of talismans. The reason why Yi Hongyu could defeat Chen Pippi was that she knew him and knew his fear. I also know Xia Ho very well. Since the day he betrayed the devil's doctrine, Xia Ho has been afraid. Maybe he was afraid of the mysterious grandmaster of the devil's doctrine, or maybe he was afraid that the Westhill Divine Palace would expose his identity. Because of fear, he felt empty. He began to kill people like flies and began to be cruel and arrogant. Ning Ke took the big black umbrella from Sang Sang and looked at the courtyard shrouded in the night snow. Only in this way can he get rid of his psychological shadow. What he said in front of the palace gates was right. I also have a psychological shadow, so I understand that his pride is a fatal weakness that he cannot get rid of. Because of his pride, he has now stepped into the battlefield that I have chosen. This is the first mistake he has made. How to make use of his mistake? I don't know. I only know that I must not hesitate to use more than 300 talismans that I have painstakingly written in the past 2 years. Writing talismans was not as casual as it seemed. Except for Ning Ke himself, not many people knew how many sleepless nights he had spent writing more than 300 talismans, how many times his psyche power was exhausted, and how many times his sense of perception had been shaken. Sang Sang knew. Because of those nights accompanied by oil lamps, she had been waiting by Ning Ke's side. She saw him sweat like beans and his face was pale, but he still wrote. In those nights, Ning Ke was not plowing the fields, nor writing the articles, but only the talismans. On the edge of the cliff in the snow, Sang Sang looked up at Ning Quebec. Seeing that his face was as pale as those nights, she was very worried. But she smiled and said, "Yes, young master will definitely win." Ning Ke closed his eyes and held the handle of the umbrella. His eyebrows and right hand were trembling, and his face was pale. The psyche power in his sense of perception spread along the black umbrella into the snow-filled sky. Psyche power was the foundation of orthodox cultivators. However, cultivators could only use psyche power to control the chi of heaven and earth, and then use various means. Even if a psyche master could directly attack the enemy with psyche power, it was limited to a very short distance. That was because psyche power had a characteristic that could not be changed. This characteristic was that once the psyche power left the cultivator's sense of perception, it would rapidly disperse with the distance and return to nature. Ning Ke was standing on the cliff on the south bank of Yanming Lake. He was a few miles away from the courtyard on the other side of the lake. If he wanted to trigger the 300 talismans hidden in the courtyard, he needed to send his psyche power to the other side. However, how could his psyche power cross the winter lake in the night snow? At this moment, something amazing happened. After his psyche power passed through the handle and the surface of the big black umbrella, there was an obvious change. It was not that the concentration of the psyche power had increased, but the speed at which it dispersed into the snow had slowed down. Because of the acupoint obstruction tune in the ocean of chi and mountain of snow, the aura of heaven and earth around the lake could not understand the song that he sang with his psyche power. But at least his voice could travel further. Ning Ke's psyche power quietly passed through the wind and snow and landed in the courtyard on the opposite bank. The yellow paper that was under the celadon lamp turned into nothingness with a slight sound. A faint sense of dryness came out of nowhere. The white, jade-like lamp rope that had never been lit suddenly tightened. The oil was released and a weak flame was ignited. The oil lamp was dim, but it slightly illuminated the inside and outside of the hall. As the celadon lamp strangely ignited without fire, there were countless changes in the room. The display shelf where the oil lamp was located was completely ignited. However, the space where the display shelf was also ignited, turning into a blazing fireball that covered Xia Ho's mountain-like body. The fire was faintly discernible and terrifying. Wherever it passed, everything was turned into nothingness. Only the green plant in the pot was different. The slightly drooping, green and tender green leaves melted like fat when they were burned by the tongue of fire in the room. They turned into light green oil and dripped into the flower pot. The yellow fu paper that was stuck in the green leaf disappeared. The green leaf turned into oil and fell into the soil. The flower pot suddenly cracked and the yellow soil inside exploded, filling the space in the room. The granular yellow dust was unknowingly extremely heavy. Every grain of gravel was like a stone, shooting towards Xia Ho's body. Then, the yellow paper on the black beam disappeared into thin air. With a loud crack, the heavy beam broke from the middle without warning and smashed towards Xia Ho's head. Xia Ho squinted his eyes. His iron-like eyebrows were not furrowed. They reflected the fire and seemed to be burning. He punched. That terrifying fist was so domineering that it squeezed out all the air in front of him. The blazing talisman fire was suddenly extinguished. It was extremely gloomy. He closed his eyes. He let the yellow gravel hit his body like stones. There was a series of crackling sounds. Countless tiny but powerful pieces of gravel smashed into his body. It was like countless hailstones falling from the sky and hitting the eaves of the palace. The robe on his body was instantly riddled with holes. But there was no expression on his face. He lowered his head. The two halves of the black beam smashed into his back. Then it broke into more pieces. The heavy beam could kill a dozen people. But it could not make his body tremble. Facing Ning Kei's 3 talismans, Xia Ho only punched. This was the peak of martial arts. Especially since he was originally a powerhouse of the Devil's Doctrine, he could ignore any attack below the knowing destiny state as long as he closed his eyes. The yellow gravel that shot out like flying stones did not leave any mark on his face. The broken beam rolled and groaned under his feet. He was not hurt at all. Only one eyelash floated away from his eyes. With Xia Ho's cultivation state, he did not have to face Ning Kei's 3 talismans directly. He could have avoided them. He could have used the simplest way to break them with a wave of his hand. The reason why he did not do so was that he had been paying attention to the broken plum flowers under the stone steps behind him. Ning Kei thought he knew him very well. He also thought he knew Ning Kei very well. He knew how cold and sinister Ning Kei was. He believed that Ning Kei would never waste 3 precious talismans just to test his strength. There must be a backup plan. There was also a yellow talisman in the broken plum flowers. Xia Ho thought it was Ning Kei's killing move, so he focused on it. As expected, the next moment, the yellow talisman in the broken plum flowers turned into a wisp of smoke. The few remaining plum flowers trembled and left the branches. They flew like butterflies to the back of Xia Ho's head. Xia Ho did not look back. He casually pointed behind him. When his fingertips touched the plum petal, his iron eyebrows suddenly frowned. The petal turned into a drop of water. The talisman in the broken plum flowers turned out to be such a shallow water talisman. Xia Ho frowned because he found that he had made a mistake in his judgment. But he did not care. He looked up with an indifferent expression. The black beam had been broken. There was a big hole in the roof. People under the eaves could see the starry sky when they looked up. It was windy and snowy tonight. There were no stars to see. Only countless snowflakes could be seen pouring in from the hole along with the night wind. There was also a talisman that was gradually dissipating into coldness. The snowflakes that fell from the hole seemed to have grown many times larger as they danced in the air. An extremely cold talisman suddenly enveloped the entire building. Even the air in the building froze. Xia Ho looked up at the falling snow. His eyebrows were instantly covered with a thick layer of frost. I was too excited when I wrote the 2 chapters the day before yesterday, which resulted in a serious increase in typos. I have changed them in the document. The mistakes in the VIP chapter will not be dealt with for technical reasons. I am going to massage and drink. Have a good weekend. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 477. This was a very powerful talisman. In a twinkling of an eye, the temperature in the house dropped sharply. Xia Ho's eyebrows were stained with frost, and the surface of the armor inside his coat also began to freeze. For a powerhouse at the peak state of martial arts, this cold talisman was powerful, but it still could not cause direct harm. He frowned slightly, and the frost on his eyebrows suddenly broke. Then he took a step forward, and the thin ice on the armor also broke and fell to the ground. But at least at this moment, Xia Ho needed to condense the chi of heaven and earth on the surface of his body with psyche power. He could no longer use his strong body and fists to fight against it as before. The battle in the lakeside house did not temporarily come to an end. In the next moment, countless yellow fu paper shot out from the inconspicuous corners of the house. The dense yellow talisman papers fluttered in the air like snowflakes falling from the hole in the roof. They danced and rotated around Xia Ho's body. As the psyche power came from an unknown place, the yellow fu paper flying like snowflakes were triggered one by one. They turned into illusions or wisps of green smoke, and the talisman power spurted out. Then the talisman power that was triggered first drove the untriggered fu paper to fly faster. The yellow fu paper in the lakeside house spouted like a waterfall, illuminating the night sky. This scene was very beautiful and shocking. Fu paper was so precious. In the past cultivation battles, who had ever seen so many fu paper appear at the same time? Immediately after, more talisman papers were activated. Countless talisman wills intertwined together, tearing the surrounding world's yuan qi into countless turbulent streams. The turbulence of qi of heaven and earth was very terrible. Even the weakest talisman power seemed to have some special power when mixed in the turbulence that cut the space. Xia Ho stood in the middle of the sea storm of talisman power and in the turbulence of the qi of heaven and earth. The emotions on his face were very complicated, a little sad and a little angry. Because he clearly remembered that this was the secret method of using talisman power by his most loyal subordinate, military stream Gushi. He did not expect that Ning Ke would use this method in the battle tonight. The cold snowy wind, the violent night wind, the scorching flames, the suffocating humidity, all kinds of completely different seal intents were squeezed together by an invisible hand. There was no reason, but it was so terrifying. Xia Ho clenched his fists with an indifferent expression. His tattered coat was torn and flew, revealing a brand new armor underneath. Then, with his extremely vigorous psyche power, he extracted what he needed from the turbulence of the qi of heaven and earth and condensed it on the surface of his body, forming an invisible but extremely strong invisible armor. The invisible qi of heaven and earth armor, together with the visible metal armor, tightly isolated him from the surrounding heaven and earth, and from the storm of talisman intent and the turbulence of qi. Xia Ho lifted his feet and walked among the yellow talismans that were flying all over the sky. The violent talisman intent kept hitting his body, making muffled sounds or sharp cutting sounds. Under the attack of the talisman, the armor on his body was sometimes covered with a thick layer of ice, and sometimes it was bright red and dazzling, as if it had been burned for 7 days and 7 nights. In order to resist the sea of talisman intent, his psyche power was slowly and irreversibly consumed, but the expression on his face still did not change at all, and his footsteps were still so stable. Xiaoho was very clear that Ning Ke was the successor of Master Yen Sei and was regarded as the future divine talisman master by the world, so he was very sure what he would face in the battle tonight. However, the number of talismans prepared by Ning Ke was far more than what he had calculated before. What was more unexpected was that Ning Ke would display all his talisman Taoism skills at the beginning of the battle. It should be known that a talisman master needed to touch the talisman with psyche power, and the distance that the psyche power could spread was congenitally limited. At this time, the lakeside house was full of flying talisman papers, which could only mean that Ning Ke was in the house at this time. Xiaoho thought that Ning Ke's approach was very confident, very proud, very arrogant, and also very idiotic. Any cultivator who fought with a powerhouse at the peak state of martial arts but did not try to keep a distance was an idiot. Since Ning Ke was by the lakeside, then he was not in a hurry to leave the sea of talisman storm. He let the talisman storm continue to consume his psyche power, because he wanted to find Ning Ke and then kill him in one fell swoop. He continued to walk forward without any movement, and a gray wall in front of him suddenly collapsed. He looked at the deep night, looked at the faintly visible lake willows in the south of the house, and said with slight mockery, "If it is not a divine talisman, how can it hurt me? Since you are so eager to die, then die." Yanming Lake was irregular. The west bank of the lake was relatively narrow and far away. The lake water was clear and shallow. Someone built a wooden bridge across the lake, and people could enjoy the water plants in the lake. It was winter, and the wooden bridge was full of snow. The lake water under the bridge had all condensed into solid thick ice, and the green silk-like water plants could no longer be seen. Only a few yellow and white reeds swayed in the wind could be seen. In such cold weather, the imperial court had blocked the area around Yanming Lake, so naturally there were no tourists. However, there were a few people standing on both sides of the wooden bridge, looking at the west of the lake with different expressions. Yi Hongyu's green Taoist robe was a little loose, and it fluttered in the wind and snow. She looked at the lakeside house in the distance, and felt the talisman storm there. There was a trace of surprise in her eyes. She had lived in that house for a long time, but it was not until now that she knew what Ning Ke had done in the house and how many terrifying talisman papers he had hidden. The Tao addict was an extremely confident person, but she had to admit that if Ning Ke used the talisman storm to deal with her, she would definitely be in an extremely difficult situation. On the other side of the wooden bridge, Chen Pipi held an oil paper umbrella in one hand, and held Tang Xiaotong's small hand in the other. He looked at the shining light in the distance from time to time in the west, and looked at the countless yellow papers dancing like a waterfall. He said in shock, "We all know that youngest brother is stingy, but who would have thought that he would make such an extravagant move tonight?" Tang Xiaotong's hand was a little cold. She was worried about her friend's current situation, and also shocked by the impact of the talisman papers by the lake. She murmured, "Talisman is such a terrible thing." On the cliff of the south bank of Yanming Lake, Ning Ke opened his eyes and looked at the talisman paper storm in the house on the other side of the lake. He heard the faint sound of the wall falling and the tiles flying. "I asked seventh sister to design the tactical array and the big black umbrella to make Xia Ho make a wrong judgment, to make him think that I am in the house. Xia Ho is actually very cautious and suspicious. On this basis, he has abnormal confidence. Since he judged that I am there, he will definitely believe that I am there." He said sarcastically, "Maybe he is still taunting me at this time, asking me to come out and fight to my heart's content." Sang Sang looked at the other side of the lake and frowned. She said, "But his strength is too strong, and the talisman sea seems to be unable to deal with him. I never expected this talisman storm to directly defeat Xia Ho. After all, I am not a divine talisman master. The talisman papers I sprinkled in the flower pots may only become useless smoke on his armor like moths flying into the fire, but there may be talismans that can cut off one of his eyelashes." He continued, "A falling eyelash is nothing, and he may not even notice it himself. But many a little makes a mickle, and it can be fatal. Just like walking, as long as you keep walking, one day you will get to the place you want to go. Even if Xiaoho is an indestructible mountain and my method is an inconspicuous spoon, if I keep hitting it, even if I keep hitting it for a long time, this mountain will still be loosened by me. The surface of the mountain will loosen, the rocks will turn into powder and fall, and the mountain will collapse and the earth will shake. After saying this, Ning Ke handed the big black umbrella in his hand to Sang Sang. Sang Sang took the big black umbrella and looked at him. She said, "Yes, young master, you will definitely win." Ning Ke's psyche power was rapidly consumed by triggering hundreds of talismans at the same time across the lake. His face was a little pale, but his eyes were still calm. He looked at the other side of the lake and slowly raised his right arm. His fingers trembled uneasily, as if there was a heavy mountain hanging between his fingers with invisible strings. He slowly moved his right arm and drew 2 horizontal and 2 vertical lines in the wind and snow in front of him. The invisible and dignified lines pointed to the house on the other side of Yanming Lake. In the house, the yellow paper that was dancing in the sky all turned into nothingness, and the dazzling light gradually faded. The violent and terrifying talisman intent was still constantly tearing the chi of heaven and earth. It was calm but contained danger. In the relatively sparse snowy night elsewhere in Chang'an, 4 faint lines appeared. Those lines had no color and should be transparent and invisible, but they could be seen. The reason why the 4 lines could be seen was that the dancing snowflakes in the night sky suddenly fled in all directions. Some of the snowflakes that could not escape quietly turned into nothingness. The 4 lines in the night sky were traces of no snow. The 4 lines, 2 horizontal and 2 vertical, formed a Jing character. The violent talisman intent in the night sky all condensed in this Jing character. Well, both horizontal and vertical, meant to cut. Jing Fu was the most terrifying and profound talisman intent of Master Yen Sei when he was alive. Before he perished together with the great divine priest of light at the top of the nameless mountain, the Jing Fu that he used could even cut the space and cut off the Haotian divine flame that the great divine priest of light obtained in the Tianqi state in the space. Ning Ke inherited all the mantle of Master Yen Sei, so he was naturally the most diligent in the study of Jing Fu. Although his state was not enough and he could not fully exert the power of Jing Fu, the Jing Fu he wrote was already powerful enough and was the most powerful talisman he could use now. And he didn't know when he could cast talismans in the indefinite form. This method was already close to the level of calligraphy addict Mo Shanshan in the wilderness. In other words, this well talisman was his half-divine talisman. Jing Fu fell from the night sky and covered the whole courtyard by the lake, as if there were countless smaller Jing Fu hidden in it, and nothing could escape. The plum blossoms were cut, the well was cut, the wall was cut, and everything was cut when the Jing Fu fell. The Jing Fu, which was straight and sharp to the extreme, fell on Xiaoho. On the surface of his body, the armor condensed by the chi of heaven and earth, there were 4 very clear marks, slightly sunken, and the brand new armor inside had 4 rusty marks. Xiaoho's dark face suddenly turned white, and then quickly turned red, then snow-white, and then flushed, changing rapidly. Psyche power came out. The chi of heaven and earth condensed on the surface of his body shook uneasily, sunk and bounced back, and finally supported the Jing Fu, but it had become much thinner, like a piece of thin paper. Then, a light sound came from his body, and the armor was broken into countless metal pieces along the 4 rusty lines, like broken copper and iron falling under his feet. Xiaoho looked at the other side of Yanming Lake, looking at the dark night. Until then, he realized that he had been in the well. And Ning Ke had been outside the well. Last night, I got a cold after drinking and blowing in the wind. I feel dizzy, my lips are blistered, and I feel suffocated. What I want to say is, I will write another chapter, hoping to improve my character. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 478. When the talisman power rose from the lakeside, Yi Su stood in the wind and snow on the city wall and said, Uncle Yen Sei really knows people well. Who would have thought that Ning Ke could have such skills in just a few days after he started talisman Taoism? In his opinion, the talismans written by Ning Ke were not very powerful, and some of them were even obvious beginner's skills. In the eyes of ordinary people, they would be amused. However, the fact that Ning Ke had written so many talismans in less than 2 years really shocked him. What shocked Yi Su most was Ning Ke's method of using talismans. The talisman sea storm by the lakeside seemed to be chaotic, but in fact, it had its own rules. The cooperation between each talisman was perfect. Otherwise, it would be impossible to create such momentum and effect. Eldest brother explained with a smile, youngest brother is a great calligrapher. He is good at writing. He has profound attainments in how to break down and write characters. Yi Su slightly frowned and said, I still can't understand how he could write so many talismans. Talisman Master paid attention to talent. Whether he was the successor of Jishou Abbey or the sage of Sword Lu Bai, it was difficult for him to get close to talisman Taoism in his life. But it did not mean that he had no understanding of talisman Taoism. Any talisman master could only use the talismans he wrote. Even if a divine talisman master like Master Yen Sei could leave several divine talismans for his disciples, the number would not be too much. Talisman master needed a lot of psyche power and painstaking efforts to write talismans. It also needed a lot of materials. Ning Ke had only been making talismans for 2 years. How could he write so many talismans? The academy has nothing but a lot of cultivation materials. If there is any shortage, the imperial court will help to prepare it. As for the psyche power needed to write talismans, eldest brother smiled and said, Mr. Yi Su probably doesn't know that youngest brother's psyche power can be ranked in the front in the back of the mountain of the academy. The disciples in the back of the mountain of the academy were not famous in the world. However, Yi Su was very clear that those people must have their own talents. At this time, when he heard that Ning Ke's psyche power could be ranked in the front in the back of the mountain of the academy, he could not help but feel a little surprised. At this moment, Jing Fu appeared over the lakeside house. Yi Su felt the straight and piercingly cold talisman intent coming from that direction. His eyebrows slowly raised and he looked in the direction of Yanming Lake for a long time. Then his eyebrows gradually relaxed and he said, half-divine talisman is not a divine talisman after all. The eldest brother looked at the lake in the night and said with a little regret, although the youngest brother has made great progress, he hasn't been practicing talisman Taoism for long, so he hasn't become a divine talisman master yet. Yi Su shook his head and said, divine talisman master, so what? Unless you reach the level of martial Uncle Yen Sei, if you want to defeat someone like Xia Ho with just a light talisman paper, it can only be wishful thinking. I've never thought that I could kill Xia Ho with talisman Taoism. My master probably had such an ability in his heyday, but I didn't. Naturally, I have my own ideas. Ning Ke looked at the other side of the river, which was once again swallowed by the darkness of the night, and said, everyone says that one can't challenge someone of a higher state. No one in the world, including the senior brothers of the academy, believes that I can defeat Xia Ho. But I insist on doing it because they have all miscalculated one thing. I have never thought of defeating Xia Ho. I only want to kill him. If you don't defeat the enemy, how can you kill the enemy? A battle is only a moment, but killing a person can be a very long process. There can be many battles in it. In the countless battles before, I may not be able to defeat him, but I can make him bleed. Then, even if I still can't defeat him in the end, his blood may be drained. When his blood is drained, he will naturally die. Tonight, Xia Ho and I are not competing with strength, psyche power, or state, but to see who can drain his blood faster. He is a powerhouse of the devil's doctrine, and his defense is too terrifying. He is like a turtle. What I have to do is to constantly bleed this turtle and make sure that I won't be bitten to death by him. Ning Ke said solemnly, thank you, Tang. I have broken the outermost layer of the turtle shell on Xia Ho's body. Then, what I have to do next is relatively simple. Sang Sang looked at him and said, We will succeed. Ning Ke said a lot today and explained a lot. If it was not Sang Sang beside him, but another audience, such as Yi Hongyu would have been extremely annoyed and would have kicked him into the ice lake under the cliff. Sang Sang was a little surprised at first, but then she understood the reason. Ning Ke did not have the slightest confidence in facing Xiaoho. Even if his expression was so calm, and his tone was so peaceful, as if he was full of confidence and everything was under control, even if he had prepared for a whole 15 years. He still did not have confidence. So he kept talking about his preparation and the reason why he would definitely win, to make himself believe that he could really succeed in the cross-state challenge and defeat the seemingly invincible and powerful enemy. Sang Sang was very worried about Ning Ke's current mental state. So she kept using a more certain tone than Ning Ke, saying, "We will definitely win." When the whole world did not believe in Ning Ke, and even when Ning Ke himself was about to lose confidence, then she was the only one left who could give him the last bit of confidence. Because this was not only Ning Ke's battle, but also the battle between the two of them. Sang Sang put the big black umbrella on her thin shoulder and stretched out her right hand to tightly grasp Ning Ke's clothes. She gripped it so hard that her calloused fingers seemed to sink into his body. Then she slowly closed her eyes without batting her eyelashes. Xiaoho walked out of the lakeside courtyard and came to the lake embankment. In front of him were several willows. The berserk sea of talisman papers attacked his powerful body thousands of times. Although it didn't leave any wounds on his body, it cut his hair bun. His black hair was mixed with several stalks of silver, and it draped over his back, making him look like a demon god in a Buddhist painting. However, his tattered clothes and the broken armor tied around his waist made this demon god look very wretched. Xiaoho reached out and tore off the pieces of armor on his waist, like throwing garbage under the willow tree. Then he looked at the night sky around Yanming Lake and coughed. In the cold winter night, the temperature was so low that the lake ice was as hard as steel. But it should not make a powerhouse at the peak state of martial arts who was as hard as steel feel it. Xiaoho was surprised that there were so many talismans in the lakeside courtyard that even the wind and snow could not bear it. He was surprised that Ning Ke's ability in talisman Taoism was much stronger than the rumors. What surprised him most was that Ning Ke could use talismans from such a distance. The accident made people vigilant. He knew that he had made a mistake, but since he knew what was wrong, he could correct it. Therefore, he did not care and still looked around the winter lake in silence. The shore of Yanming Lake was covered in white snow. However, the night was too dark. There were no stars or lights. Therefore, the bright sky and the earth were dim and the snow seemed to have turned black. The night shrouded the nearby willows and the distant reeds. Whether it was the frozen lake water or the hills around the lake, they were all dark. No matter how sensitive one's perception was, one could not see anything with the naked eye. Xiaoho did not know where Ning Ke was at this time. He only knew that he must be on the shore of Yanming Lake, but he did not know whether it was the wooden bridge on the west bank, the snow forest on the east bank or the cliff on the south bank. But he was sure that if Ning Ke moved again, he would die. Ning Ke stood on the cliff, holding an iron bow in his hand. He raised the iron bow and slowly pulled the bowstring. The bowstring hummed slightly and was instantly covered by the wind and snow. There was some snow on the black iron bow, making it look colder. The iron arrow engraved with complicated talisman lines on the bowstring was aimed at the night sky on the north bank of Yanming Lake. The night clouds covered the stars, and it was dark everywhere. There were no stars, and no figure. Xiaoho could not see him, and Ning Ke naturally could not see Xiaoho. This time was different from last year when he shot Prince Longqing on the snow cliff in the wilderness. At that time, Prince Longqing was at the critical moment of breaking the realm. His cultivation state was full of vigor, as if he was burning his natal life. In Ning Ke's sense of perception, he was like a golden flower that was about to bloom. Even if he was more than 10 miles away, he clearly did not need to aim. Xiaoho, as a powerhouse at the peak state of martial arts, could merge with the willows by the lake. Even if Ning Ke entered the knowing destiny state, he could not locate Xiaoho. In this case, where was he going to shoot the primordial 13 arrows in his hand? At this moment, Sang Sang, who was under the big black umbrella, closed her eyes and frowned her thin eyebrows. She said 2 numbers. 6, 3, 3. 2, 1, 7, 7, 2. More than 2 years ago, deep in the Min Mountain in spring, an arrow came from the northern mountain road. At that time, the forest was burning. When the third assassin attacked Ning Ke, Sang Sang hid under the big black umbrella, closed her eyes, and shouted 2 words with all her strength. More than 2 years later, by the cliff of the ice lake in the cold winter, under the willows on the north bank, a strong enemy stood silently. At this time, wind and snow were dancing on the cliff, and Sang Sang shouted 2 numbers again. These numbers were coordinates that only Ning Ke and Sang Sang understood. In the past 15 years, they accompanied them to hunt in the Min Mountain. Fighting with their lives on the line had become instinctive and would not make mistakes. It was almost the same as 2 years ago, but the numbers shouted by Sang Sang tonight were much more complicated. The complexity of the number often represented the degree of accuracy. The cold and dark arrow moved slowly, looking for a target in the night snow. Then it stopped. He released the taut bowstring. The iron arrow left the bowstring and disappeared in the turbulent hole in front of the bow, and disappeared in the wind and snow. Xiaoho firmly believed that as long as Ning Ke attacked again, he would die. Ning Ke used the most powerful primordial 13 arrows. The dark iron arrow disappeared in front of the cliff a moment ago. The next moment, it suddenly appeared in front of Xiaoho. The talisman lines on the arrow were slightly bright, and the remaining snowflakes were not blown away by the wind. At this moment, the primordial 13 arrows seemed to break through the constraints of distance and time. They were even no longer affected by the surrounding environment. The cold arrow pierced through Xiaoho's close-fitting clothes. The chi of heaven and earth on the surface of his body suddenly sank. Xiaoho felt something. He reached out and grasped the air. He only had time to hold the middle part of the arrow. There were probably only a few people in the world who could hold Ning Ke's primordial 13 arrows. The iron arrow made an ear-piercing sound in the iron palm. Sparks flew everywhere, illuminating the willows by the lake. Tomorrow is the 2nd anniversary of my marriage with my leader. I only write 1 chapter. From the day after tomorrow, I will write 2 chapters a day until the end of the month. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 479. The iron arrow in Xiaoho's hand continued to move towards his chest and was about to pierce into his body. Xiaoho's eyes suddenly lit up like stars. With a roar, the sparks caused by the friction between the iron arrow and his palm were extinguished instantly. A strong wind blew on the embankment and the willows were all broken, dancing wildly in the snow. Accompanied by the terrifying impact, Xiaoho's body flew backward. His feet were like iron pillars stepping on the embankment, plowing 2 extremely deep ravines. If the Yanming Lake had not been frozen, the lake water would have flowed in. The cluster of the iron arrow pierced through the chi of heaven and earth on the surface of his body. It pierced through his clothes and skin, leaving a shallow wound from which a drop of blood slowly seeped out. Xiaoho raised his head and looked towards the southern shore of the Yanming Lake. His dark face turned pale and he began to cough. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. There was an empty passage above the ice lake on a snowy night. There was no snow in it. Only then did the snow fall again and was crushed into pieces by the aftershock of the arrow. This was the art of archery. The other end of the arrow was on the cliff on the southern shore of the Yanming Lake. Xiaoho finally confirmed Ning Ke's position. He looked over there expressionlessly and released a strong aura from his body. Snow and dust danced wildly and formed a circle among the swaying willows. Then, the ground where his feet stood suddenly sank, forming a perfect circle of about 10 feet. Borrowing the terrifying counterforce, his body disappeared from the lake embankment, leaving only the lingering wind. A few pieces of snow fell. Xiaohou left the embankment and began to run towards the southern shore of the lake. His feet stepped heavily on the surface of the lake. The ice of the Yanming Lake was extremely solid. Even with the impact of his body in high speed, it still did not break. However, every time he stepped, a few inconspicuous cracks would appear. Beneath the solid lake ice was the water. Feeling the mountain-like weight on the ice, it began to shake uneasily, making a dull and strange sound. It was as if drumsticks were beating heavily on a war drum, producing a dull thumping sound. This winter lake was his war drum. The frequency at which he struck the war drum was not high, but every strike was powerful. Xiaohou's running pace was not fast, but every step he took seemed to cross mountains and rivers. In the blink of an eye, his figure had already appeared on the frozen Yanming Lake. If someone could see through the darkness of the night, perhaps they would be able to see the afterimage on the lake. An expert at the peak of the martial Dao possessed absolute power. When he transformed his power into speed, it was difficult to describe the terrifying degree with words or comparison. The night wind on the snow lake was certainly not as fast as this, and neither was the falling snow. Even if Ning Kei's talisman arrows were faster, there was no way he could hit such a fast target. On the battlefield, this was a very simple principle. Both Xiaohou and Ning Kei had been through hundreds of battles, so they knew this very well. Xiaohou had been vigilantly waiting for the legendary primordial 13 arrows ever since he knew that Ning Kei was hostile to him. He thought for a long time and finally came to a conclusion. As long as he ran, the primordial 13 arrows would not pose any threat to him. His sturdy military boots cracked the ice on the lake and he arrived at the snowy lake. There were withered lotuses frozen in the water. They had long died and accumulated snow, looking very miserable. Just as Xiaohou stepped on a withered lotus, the other withered lotuses next to it trembled, as if they had regained some kind of vitality. Then, there was a loud bang. The ice on the winter lake cracked, the withered lotuses all collapsed, the fire burst, and the airwaves rolled wildly. Xiaohou's mountain-like body was actually shaken high up into the air. Among the fire and airwaves, there were countless shrill whistles and hissing sounds. The withered lotuses that were not shaken by the explosion seemed to have been cut by a sharp blade. They were all broken and turned into countless pieces. Xiaohou landed heavily on the snow lake, splashing snowflakes. His knees were slightly bent and his military boots were torn, but his body was strong enough to maintain balance and did not fall. What followed him to the ground were countless extremely sharp and hard iron shards. The high-speed iron shards whistled and slashed the withered lotuses, then fell on the ice like rain. The sharp iron shards stuck to his body. The chi of heaven and earth on the surface of his body, at the most dangerous moment, blocked most of the power of the explosion and the cutting of the sharp iron shards. But there were still dozens of sharp iron shards that wedged into his body. Many wounds appeared on Xiaohou's hard skin, and blood began to flow. At this moment, the second iron arrow arrived. It was sudden and without warning. Xiaohou looked at the snow floating on the winter lake and timidly avoided it. He poured his qi into his right arm and waved it expressionlessly. This seemingly simple wave caused the night wind to blow on the snow lake and the ice to roll wildly. There was a sharp crack. A clear cut appeared on his right arm. The iron arrow was shaken and brushed past his body into the snow lake. With a boom, a dark and gloomy hole appeared on the extremely hard lake ice. Xiaohou suddenly looked up and stared in the direction of the south bank. Then, he began to run again. He confirmed that he had underestimated Ning Kei's means. But he could no longer retreat. He had to close the distance between him and Ning Quebec. Therefore, no matter how many tricks were hidden in this winter lake, or how many explosions like the one before were hidden in the withered lotus field, he had to rush over. He continued to run into the lotus field. Then, the second explosion occurred. The primordial 13 arrows could ignore the distance, but not the moving speed of the target. Ning Ke also knew this. Moreover, Xiaoho's devil's doctrine was extremely powerful. His physical strength was not comparable to Prince Long Qing's. Therefore, he never expected to kill Xiaoho with the primordial 13 arrows alone. Fortunately, there was a lotus field in Yanming Lake. In late spring, Ning Ke bought all the houses by the Yanming Lake and turned it into a lake in his backyard. He planted many lotus flowers in the lake. In midsummer, he and Sang Sang boated on the lake and walked through the dense lotus field. They enjoyed the lake, the wind, the stars, and the lotus seeds. Then, they threw many small iron kettles into the lotus field. In winter, Yanming Lake was frozen. The surface of the ice was thick, and the lotus field had long withered. The small iron kettles that had sunk deep in the mud of the lotus field began to wake up. With the awakening of the small iron kettles, explosions sounded one after another on the snow lake. The blazing flames and terrifying waves of air shook the snow on the surface of the lake into the air. Countless sharp and hard pieces of metal whistled through the wind and snow. Many black holes appeared on the hard layer of ice on the lake. Between the whistling wind and the iron pieces, Xiaoho was already covered in blood. What was more terrifying was that every time he slowed down because of the explosion, Sang Sang, who was holding the big black umbrella on the cliff of the south bank, would report his position. Then, Ning Ke would shoot an arrow. The next moment, the terrifying and cold iron arrow would arrive in front of Xiaoho. The small iron kettles were flowers. Ning Ke and Sang Sang had planted many lotuses in this winter lake, and the number of kettles they threw would be the same number of flowers on the lake tonight. The iron arrows were thorns. Ning Ke had 13 primordial 13 arrows in his arrow box. Then, he would definitely take advantage of the time when the snow lake was blooming to shoot all of them. I have reported to everyone that there are some things that I will not write today. I will try to write more tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 480. The winter lake should have been quiet and dark under the night snow. However, there was a strong gust of wind on the surface of the lake tonight, accompanied by terrifying explosions and sparks. Iron lotuses blossomed in the frozen lotus field. The thick snow on the surface of the lake was thrown up by an invisible force and sprinkled into the dark night sky. The thick layer of ice collapsed and exploded. The ink-like cold lake water kept slapping against the black hole, stirring up snow-like waves and then dissipating into the real snow. In the withered lotus field, Xiaoho was once again shaken by the airwave. Accompanied by the sharp sound of iron shrapnel, his mountain-like body broke through the wind and seemed to be thrown above the night clouds. On the cliff of the south bank of Yanming Lake, Sang Sang held the big black umbrella tightly in one hand and Ning Ke's clothes in the other. She lowered her head and closed her eyes. She did not look at the chaotic scene on the lake in front of the cliff, but she seemed to be able to clearly capture the position of everything. She whispered 2 numbers again. Hearing the 2 numbers, Ning Ke did not hesitate to draw his bow and shoot at the distant night clouds above. It was pitch black and he could not see clearly what was there, but he knew that Xiaoho was there. The sky was covered in a blizzard. It was pitch black and the arrow could not be seen. Only the sharp whistling of the primordial 13 arrows could be heard. When people heard the whistling of the arrows, it was already the next moment. The night clouds above Yanming Lake suddenly fluctuated and the qi of heaven and earth became chaotic. It was as if there was an explosion of thunder in the dark clouds, and the dim wisps of clouds fled in all directions. The night clouds suddenly broke and blood splashed. Xiaoho fell from the sky. This time, he could no longer maintain his balance and smashed heavily on the ice, causing a few deep cracks to appear on the ice. A cold and dark iron arrow pierced deeply through his left arm. Because of anger and pain, Xia Ho's eyes seemed to be burning. He was like an injured beast king. He grabbed the tail of the iron arrow and pulled it out from his upper arm. He continued to run towards the south bank. He only had time to take 3 steps forward. At the bottom of the lotus field, there was another powerful explosion in the mud. The layer of ice under his feet suddenly cracked, almost swallowing his body into the dark and cold lake water. What followed were the heat waves, flames, and the extremely sinister and terrifying sharp iron pieces. When the waves in the lake passed through the ice and reached the feet of the military boots, Xia Ho made the most timely response with the ability of a powerhouse at the peak of martial arts. With a heavy step, he left the frozen surface of the lake and flew into the air. Then, he raised his fists in front of him as fast as lightning. Xia Ho let out a muffled groan as he was sent flying hundreds of feet away until he was out of the lotus field. His arms and the parts of his body that could not be covered by his arms had dozens of small pieces of iron. Blood seeped out of the wounds, looking like red grass in the wilderness in autumn. Although Xia Ho was a powerhouse at the peak state of martial arts, his spirit and qi and blood had been severely depleted after continuously withstanding the explosions in the lotus field, especially the primordial 13 arrows from Ning, Quebec. The qi of heaven and earth that had condensed on the surface of his body had dissipated and could no longer protect his body. His skin, which was as hard as metal under the effect of the devil's doctrine's genuine qi, now had numerous wounds on it. Although there were no fatal injuries, his bloody appearance made him look extremely pathetic. At this moment, another primordial 13 arrow pierced through the burning lotus and snow, silently arriving in front of Xia Ho, not giving him any chance to breathe. Xia Ho put his palms together and forcibly clamped the terrifying iron arrow in front of him. His body retreated another 100 feet on the ice. The ice and snow under his body splashed everywhere. His face was pale, and more blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. Ning Ke stood under the cliff on the south bank of Yanming Lake, silently watching all the movements on the surface of the lake. When Xia Ho was once again blown up and retreated, he used the flash of light from the explosion to determine Xia Ho's position. After hearing Sang Sang's position, he stroked the bowstring with his fingers. Archery was the most powerful skill of the woodcutter at Shubi Lake. However, in the past, ordinary bows and arrows did not mean much to martial arts cultivators. But once a weapon like the primordial 13 arrow appeared in the world, Ning Ke would become a nightmare for all cultivators in a sense. Ning Ke's shooting was not fast, but there was a very strange sense of rhythm. From the moment Sang Sang reported the position to the moment the iron arrow left the bowstring, the process was so smooth that there seemed to be no waiting. There was some kind of truth hidden in the process. In the face of such powerful archery, and more importantly, with Sang Sang beside him, Xia Ho could not avoid those silent but powerful iron arrows no matter how strong he was. He could only resist, endure, and continue to bleed. It all depended on whether his blood would run out when Ning Ke finished shooting the 13 iron arrows, and whether he could rush to Ning Ke's side. The speed of the primordial 13 arrow was too shocking, far faster than the speed of sound. So only when it hit the target would the sound of the arrow travel diagonally in both directions. By the wooden bridge on the west bank of Yanming Lake, the reeds suddenly swayed. Yi Hongyu's green Taoist robe fluttered, and then she heard the sound of the arrow. Primordial 13 arrow? Yi Hongyu was slightly shocked. She had seen the primordial 13 arrow on the snow cliff in the wilderness and by the Daming Lake. She knew the power of the talisman arrow that gathered the wisdom of the second floor of the academy. However, the wind and snow were chaotic tonight, the reeds were swaying, and her green Taoist robe was fluttering in the lingering sound of the arrow. Only then did she realize that in less than a year, Ning Ke's primordial 13 arrow had become even more terrifying. Then, the explosion in the lotus field of Yanming Lake spread to the snow bridge. She frowned and said, "What is this?" Explosions after explosions, flashes after flashes of fire, shrill screeches of spinning metal pieces, and the terrifying arrow intent in the night snow made her face paler and paler. She looked at the lake in the east and suddenly said something very puzzling, "I'm dead." Chen Pipi and Tang Xiaotang had been standing on the other side of the wooden bridge. They were watching the battle on the lake, worried about Ning Ke and Sang Sang, and were silent. Yi Hongyu did not know what the explosion was, but Chen Pipi had seen the small iron kettle experiment, but he did not explain. Just when Yi Hongyu said those 3 words, he looked at the distant arrow and the thunderous fire, and said with a complicated expression, "I'm dead too." They were still standing on the wooden bridge, so naturally they were not dead. But when they heard the explosion and the arrow coming from Yanming Lake, they both said the same thing. "I'm dead." Yi Hongyu was the Tao addict of the West Hill Divine Palace, and Chen Pipi was the youngest grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state in the world. They were the most talented and powerful young people in Haotian Taoism. The reason why they said "I'm dead" was because they were watching the battle in silence. They were sure that if they were in Xiao's position, facing Ning Ke's 15 years of painstaking preparation from summer to winter, they would only be able to hold on until this moment and then die. On the snowy city wall, Yi Su said, "I never thought that a cultivator in the see-through state could make such a big noise. It seems that I have underestimated Ning Quebec. But what's with the explosion in the lotus field?" Eldest brother did not speak. As the eldest brother of the academy, he naturally knew what was going on. But like Chen Pipi, he would not tell others about his youngest brother's trump card. Yi Su looked at the direction of Yanming Lake and was silent for a long time. He slowly shook his head and said, "If Ning Ke's methods were used to deal with other cultivators, it would be a deadly weapon. But to kill Xiao with talismans, arrows, and these strange explosions, it is still not enough." The snow on Yanming Lake gradually stopped, but the snowstorm in the palace continued. Under the night snow, the main hall was brightly lit and silent. Naturally, there were no cicadas chirping. Everyone knew what was happening in Chang'an, so everyone inside and outside the main hall had a strange look on their faces. The guards held the cold hilts of their swords and stood guard outside the hall. The eunuchs and palace maids lowered their heads and walked slowly, making sure that when their feet touched the ground, there would be no sound. The Tang Emperor did not wear his regular clothes tonight. Instead, he wore a bright yellow dragon robe. He leaned on the soft couch and read a scroll in his hand, but no one knew if he could focus on it. The Empress sat on the chair beside the couch. Her gentle and elegant face was expressionless today. One could vaguely see worry and anger in the depths of her eyes. The nation master of Tang, Li Qingshan, and the emperor's younger brother, Master Huang Yang, sat opposite each other in front of the couch. Today, many powerhouses gathered in Chang'an, so the 2 most powerful and trustworthy sublime people of the imperial court had to be in the palace. The emperor slowly put down the scroll in his hand and looked at the falling snow outside the hall. He looked in the direction of Yanming Lake in the south and frowned slightly. No one knew what he was thinking about. Although Xia Ho was the empress' elder brother, from an emotional point of view, His Majesty hoped that Ning Ke could win. Because His Majesty had always regarded himself as a student of the headmaster of academy, then in his eyes, Ning Ke was his younger brother. What a majestic aura. Li Qingshan felt the fluctuation of the qi of heaven and earth from Yanming Lake and said, "Ning Ke's talisman arrow is really terrifying." The Empress suddenly raised her head and looked at the Emperor. She said in a trembling voice, gathering the wisdom of the Academy's back mountain and the power of the Tang Empire to create such a talisman arrow. "Is this fair?" The Emperor was silent. He did not want to make his wife more upset. Master Huang Yang, who had been silent, suddenly said calmly, "It's fair. It's just that Ning Ke has prepared for a longer time. He has prepared for 15 years. After saying this, he and Li Qingshan left their seats and walked out into the snow outside the hall, leaving the quiet and complicated palace to the Emperor and the Empress. There was a pavilion at the back of the main hall, and an ancient bell hung in the pavilion. There was a thick layer of snow on the eaves of the pavilion, and a light layer of snow on the ancient bell. Li Qingshan and Huang Yang walked into the pavilion and stood beside the ancient bell. Li Qingshan looked to the south and said with a deep frown, "It's still not enough." Monk Wangyang said, "I didn't expect that you also hoped that Ning Ke would win." Li Qingshan said, "People's emotions are uncontrollable." Although Xia Ho is an elder of our Haotian Taoism, Ning Ke is my senior brother's only successor. Then he said with slight sadness, "He has prepared for 15 years, but it's still not enough." Monk Wangyang reached out his palm and gently wiped the snow on the ancient bell. He said, "When Ning Ke entered Talisman Taoism, he once came to the Wanyan Tower to ask me. I also hoped that he could win, but I had my own thoughts. If the one who prepared for a longer time would win, then what's the point of cultivation?" The blizzard abruptly stopped, and the airwaves caused by the explosion gradually subsided. The night wind also became much gentler. Yanming Lake was quiet in the middle of the night. The night clouds on the lake gradually parted, revealing a gap. A few stars popped out of the gap and looked curiously at the ground, trying to see what had happened. Most of the night sky was still covered by thick black clouds. The few stars disappeared as soon as they appeared, but some light shone down, making things slightly visible. It was a mess on the ice surface of the snow lake. The withered lotus had long been broken into powder, and dozens of faint black holes appeared in the lotus field. It was chilling to see. A burly man knelt on one knee on the ice in front of those black holes. His clothes were in tatters, and it was unknown if there were dozens or hundreds of pieces of metal. Blood continuously flowed from his body, finally flowing onto the snow on the surface of the lake, dyeing the snow around his knees dark red. The red on the winter night was actually more like black. The place where the burly man knelt was only a few hundred feet away from the south bank of Yanming Lake. Ning Ke stood on the cliff by the lake and stared at the lake. In order to fight and shoot arrows, he wore a black academy uniform. The sleeves and trousers were tied tightly by sangsang with cloth ropes. At this moment, his body, especially his right arm, was trembling violently, so the black academy uniform flapped in the lake wind. Using the primordial 13 arrows consumed a lot of physical strength and psyche power. Ning Ke could only shoot a few arrows in the past. Now that he had successfully cultivated the Great Spirit, it was still a great burden for him to shoot all 13 iron arrows in the quiver. In addition to the hundreds of talismans in the lakeside house and the small iron kettle in the mud at the bottom of the lake, he had used all his means. At this moment, the psyche power in his sense of perception was almost exhausted. His eyes were abnormally bright, and his face was abnormally pale and haggard. His right arm was extremely weak, and his right shoulder felt as if it was being torn apart. He was so weak that he could fall at any time. But he did not fall. He waited for Xia Ho to fall first on the lake. Xia Ho knelt on one knee on the snow lake. In the end, he did not manage to block Ning Ke's last primordial 13 arrow. The cold and dark iron arrow directly pierced through his calf bone. If it was an ordinary cultivator who was shot by this iron arrow, his leg would definitely be broken. Xia Ho was not an ordinary cultivator. His leg was not broken, and the iron arrow did not even pierce through his leg. However, this caused him more serious injuries and more pain. Xia Ho reached out his right hand to hold the iron arrow in his calf. He wanted to pull the arrow out, but his hands were trembling so badly that he did not succeed. He added his left hand with a blank expression. His two iron hands suddenly exerted force, and the hard iron arrow was actually broken in the middle. This action would definitely bring great pain. Xia Ho's iron eyebrows twitched violently. His lips, which looked like they were smeared with rouge, opened and let out a shrill howl. The shrill and terrifying howl reverberated on the quiet snow lake. It shook the ice and snow, and even the willows by the shore danced. Xia Ho's knees gradually straightened and he stood up. At this moment, he was covered in blood and looked extremely miserable. However, when he stood on the snow lake, he was extremely domineering, like an indestructible mountain. He was more like the blood flag outside the courtyard on the north shore of Yanming Lake. That blood flag whistled and danced in the cold wind, but it seemed as if it would never fall. Xia Ho looked at the cliff on the south cliff. His pale face was devoid of any expression, and his trembling voice was clearly filled with pain. However, his words were still filled with an insufferably arrogant aura. Ning Ke, is that all? There's more today. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 481. Is this all you've got? Do you think you can kill me like this? I haven't even used my most powerful move. Don't tell me you can't do it. A shrill howl reverberated across the snow lake. Xia Ho walked towards the southern shore of Yanming Lake in the night. Because of his leg injury, he walked very slowly. His voice trembled a little, but his footsteps were still as steady as ever. His aura was still as strong as ever, unparalleled in the world. Ning Ke, who was standing on the edge of the cliff, looked at Xia Ho, who was walking slowly on the ice surface of the lake. His face was expressionless, but he felt a little strange. He felt the coldness brought by the wind and snow. The primordial 13 arrows in the arrow box had been shot out. The hundreds of fu papers that he had accumulated over the past 2 years had turned into a yellow waterfall and colorful storm in the house on the north bank. The small iron kettles in the mud at the bottom of the lake had all exploded. He seemed to have used his most powerful move, but he still could not kill Xia Ho. He could not even stop Xia Ho from walking slowly toward the south bank. Was this the power of a powerhouse at the peak of martial arts? The snowflakes falling on the city wall had become much sparser. Eldest brother looked in the direction of Yanming Lake. His clean eyes could not hide his worried expression. The old cotton-padded jacket on him trembled slightly, as if it was hesitating to float up. Yi Su's expression was slightly stern. He did not expect that the battle on the winter lake would present such a situation. From the beginning to the present, Xia Ho had been completely restrained and had suffered such heavy injuries. I have to admit that Ning Ke has given me a lot of surprises. The last disciple of the headmaster of academy is indeed not an ordinary person. But it is a pity that he will die tonight. He looked at eldest brother and said, unless you make a move. Eldest senior brother understood the meaning of this sentence. Tonight, all the powerhouses in the world had gathered in Chang'an City. Only he and Jun Mo from the academy were here to create a fair environment for Ning Quebec. Jun Mo was responsible for watching the Tang military, while he was responsible for watching the peerless genius of Haotian Taoism. Correspondingly, he and Jun Mo were also being watched by the other party. If he made a move, then Yi Su would definitely make a move. Eldest brother's expression gradually became gentle and calm, as if he had thought of something. Teacher often asks me to learn from junior brother, and I've been thinking about what I should learn. Now that I think about it, it's to learn from his attitude when he's in trouble. He looked in the direction of Yanming Lake and said, the most admirable thing about youngest brother is himself. He is his own sky and has no limits. When everyone in the world thinks that he can't do it, he can always take another step forward and climb another step on the stone steps. He was like this when he entered the academy, when he entered the old academy, and when he climbed the mountain path to the second floor. How could there be an accident tonight? There were many torches lit outside the Yulin Royal Guards barracks, illuminating the surroundings. The snow bridge outside the barracks looked like a jade belt, and the man wearing a tall crown on the snow bridge looked like an immortal on the jade belt. As the wind and snow drifted, time continued to pass. From day to night, it was unknown how much time had passed, but the confrontation on the snowy bridge continued. The second brother of the academy, Jun Mo, had been sitting on the snow bridge. The Defender General of the state, Su Shi, and the powerful Yulin Royal Guards had been staying under the snow bridge. General Su Shi leaned against the railing under the snow bridge and looked at second brother, who was sitting cross-legged on the snow bridge. He coughed painfully and said, Ning Ke's challenge to Xia Ho, in my opinion, is a challenge to the dignity of the Tang military, so I want to stop this battle from happening. Second brother slowly raised his head and looked at the leader of the Tang military. The thin snow covering his eyebrows fell, and he said, "Since the battle has begun, there's no need for words." "Yes, there's no need for words." Su Shi raised his eyebrows and looked at second brother angrily. "So you want Ning Ke to die?" Second brother said, "Since the battle has begun, there will be life and death. As soldiers of the Tang Empire, don't you understand this simple truth?" After a short pause, he said coldly, "Moreover, Xia Ho is not a great figure. Who dares to say that my youngest brother will definitely lose?" In the eyes of Mr. Second of the Academy, Xia Ho, the general of the Tang Empire, was indeed not a terrifying opponent. But now it was Ning Ke who was fighting against Xia Ho. Su Shi thought so and then said indifferently, "There are no miracles in the world." Second brother looked at him and said seriously, "The Academy is a place to create miracles. If I can't kill this person after 15 years of preparation, then the rest can only depend on destiny." But the teacher said that there is no destiny in the world. Ning Ke thought so while standing on the cliff. He looked up at the sky and then looked down at the person walking on the snow lake. He slowly raised his eyebrows and asked, "Can we really succeed?" After the arrow box was empty, Sang Sang opened her eyes. She held the big black umbrella and looked at Ning Ke's eyes. She nodded very hard and said, "Because we have to succeed." Ning Ke laughed and thought that was true. No matter whether destiny existed or not, no matter whether he could succeed or not, he had to succeed. Then he should not think about anything else other than success. He looked at the domineering figure on the snow lake and said, "You only have a pair of weak fists and half a broken body. I have a fresh knife, why can't I kill you?" On the snow lake, Xia Ho's body slightly paused. In this moment of stagnation, Ning Ke stretched out his right hand and held the hilt in the cold wind. His fingers felt the familiar touch of the velvet grass and suddenly tightened. With a clang, he pulled out the padao from the sheath. Many years ago, Ning Ke had gotten used to carrying 3 knives in order to deal with Xia Ho's team of 3 assassins. Later, he no longer needed to deal with those assassins, but only Xia Ho himself. So he asked the 6th brother of the academy to combine the 3 knives into one. The knife was long and thin, but extremely heavy. Its lines were smooth but not beautiful. The blade was not shiny, but plain. It was a knife used to kill people. Ning Ke held the knife with one hand and rushed down the cliff. The cliff was very steep. He was getting faster and faster until he was about to turn into a black shadow. The shadow behind the black shadow was the shadow of the knife. For some reason, Ning Ke insisted on not carving talisman lines on the knife. Instead, he kept it as it was, smooth and simple to the extreme. It was probably because he wanted to display the simplest swordsmanship. Because he firmly believed that the simplest was the most powerful. Just like when he rushed down the cliff and slashed at the powerful man on the snow lake. He was clearly more than 100 feet away from Xia Ho. But his knife momentum had appeared in advance. It was to rush straight, then sweep, then raise, and finally slash down. That was what Ning Ke was going to do. He knew that Xia Ho could understand what he was going to do. He wanted to know how Xia Ho would take it. If Xia Ho really took it, then he believed that it would be his chance. Xia Ho did not choose to forcefully take Ning Ke's long-prepared strike. He also did not fight back with his iron fists as he usually did. He also did not deal with the assassins from the Yen Kingdom like he did in the military camp, where he roared like thunder and turned 2 powerhouses in the see-through state into idiots. This was because he had been injured by Tang. His armor had been broken by the blood cutlass of the Devil's Doctrine. Many of Tang's fists were still hidden in his body. He was not in his peak state. Moreover, he had also been injured by Ning Ke's talisman storm and the attack of arrows and flowers. Xia Ho did not choose to avoid the knife. As a strong man at the peak state of martial arts, he was best at close combat. Why would he be afraid of this simple but powerful knife momentum? He had said before that he had not used his most powerful move. Now he finally moved. He stood on the snow lake and closed his eyes. His bleeding hands reached into the cold night wind. The psyche power in his sense of perception gushed out through the ocean of chi and mountain of snow. It immediately blended into the chi of heaven and earth around Yanming Lake and formed a rope. It traveled several miles in an instant and landed somewhere on the north bank. Outside the courtyard on the north bank of Yanming Lake, there was a blood-colored military flag. That was Xia Ho's flag. The military flag that was slowly fluttering in the night wind seemed to have heard a military order. It suddenly tightened and danced uneasily in front of the courtyard gate, like a monster that wanted to break free from its chains and fight at the front line. Previously, before Xia Ho entered the courtyard, he had inserted the military flag deep into the stone ground, causing several cracks to appear beside the flagpole. At this time, the military flag was fluttering restlessly, the flagpole was shaking non-stop, and the cracks on the ground suddenly became deeper and wider, spreading out in all directions, looking like a spider web. With a cracking sound, the stone ground under the flagpole cracked and gravel flew everywhere. The blood-colored military flag struggled out of the ground and flew towards Yanming Lake. There was a hurricane in front of the courtyard. The blood flag that was torn into pieces by the wind fell down. In the low night clouds above Yanming Lake, there was a terrifying buzzing sound and a black shadow could be seen faintly. It was as if a saint was riding a sword in the clouds. Ning Ke did not know that a strange scene had happened in front of his courtyard. He did not even know that the blood-colored military flag had been broken and only the flagpole was left roaring in the clouds. He was sprinting on the cliff. In his eyes, there was only Xia Ho's figure 1,000 feet away. However, at this moment, he suddenly felt a sense of danger. A fragment in the depths of his sense of perception suddenly lit up. In the blink of an eye, his right foot stomped heavily on a protruding rock on the cliff wall. He used the force to forcefully twist his body in the air and faced Yi Yun. The great spirit in his body surged into his arms, and he brandished the heavy and sturdy Biyao in front of him, forming an impenetrable blade pattern. Wherever the blade pattern swept past, the cliff rocks flew everywhere. The night clouds above the lake suddenly became chaotic. A black shadow in the shape of a stick broke through the clouds and landed on the edge of the cliff in an instant. It was extremely unreasonable and ruthlessly stabbed into the Biyao in front of him. There was a loud bang. Ning Ke felt an uncontrollable huge force passing through the Biyao to his body. His body was still in the air when he suddenly suffered a heavy blow. He fell heavily and then accelerated his fall, crashing into the snow lake at the bottom of the cliff, stirring up waves of snow high into the sky. Ning Ke stood up from the snow and wiped the blood from the corner of his lips. He looked at the dark stick-like object in Xia Ho's hand, and a strong sense of alarm rose in his heart. Xia Ho looked at him and his eyes gradually narrowed. He seemed to have discovered something very strange. Ning Ke asked, "What is this?" Xia Ho said, "A spear." Only the flagpole was left of the blood-colored military flag. The flagpole was the spear. Let me first say that tomorrow's chapter is called Open Spear. P.S. A friend has written a xianxia book called The Brave General. The book number is 2093193. It has already exceeded 2 million words and is about to reach 2,000 subscriptions. It is fighting to be published. If you are interested in xianxia books, you may want to take a look. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 482. The iron spear was the flagpole of the blood flag, so it was especially long. When it landed on the ice, it was much taller than Xia Ho's burly body. The body of the spear was dark and gloomy. It was straight and smooth without any carvings on the surface. The only difference between it and a stick was that one end was extremely sharp and shining. Although Ning Ke had reacted in advance at the most critical moment and saved his life, his arms were still in great pain from the shock, as if his bones were broken. As for his chest and abdomen, he felt extremely uncomfortable, as if blood was slowly gathering there. The flag was broken and the pole was sent flying. An iron spear came from several li away, piercing through the clouds, and yet it was able to smash him into such a sorry state that he almost lost his life. It was really hard to imagine how much power this spear contained. It was not until then that Ning Ke realized that Xiao Ho's most powerful skill was not the overbearing devil's doctrine's qi in his body, but the iron spear that could break through the clouds at any time. No one knew that Xiao Ho was good at using spears, not even he. This black iron spear was used by Xiao Ho as a flying sword. How could a powerhouse at the peak state of martial arts from the devil's doctrine possess such exquisite and powerful Haotian Taoism skills? The iron spear stood on the snow lake, exuding an undisguised sense of power. It openly announced its existence and killing intent to the opponent and the nature around the lake. Ning Ke raised his right arm and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He asked, "What's the name of this spear?" "An open spear." Xiao Ho said, "You have a hidden arrow, and I have an open spear." Ning Ke coughed up a mouthful of blood and gasped. "Good spear, good name." Xiao Ho looked at the slender padao in his right hand and squinted. "You also have a good blade." It was indeed a good blade. Otherwise, it would not have been able to resist the iron spear that broke through the clouds and fell from the sky. It would have broken into countless pieces in an instant. Xiao Ho said expressionlessly, "But in the world, except for Lu Bai's sword, who is qualified to fight against my spear?" Since he betrayed the devil's doctrine and pledged his loyalty to Haotian Taoism, Xiao Ho had been silently preparing to deal with Master Lotus, who might still be alive, and especially the 23-year cicada cultivation, which could not possibly die quietly. His preparation was the iron spear in his hand. This spear was personally forged by him. The spear intent of the spear came from the Abbey Dean of the Jishou Abbey. In these years of cultivation, Xiao Ho forcefully went against the cultivation method and forcefully cultivated the Taoist cultivation method. Unexpectedly, he successfully cultivated the iron spear into his natal item. From that day onwards, this spear finally gained a brand new spear intent. Xiao Ho thought that it was light, or rather, he hoped that there would be light in the future, so he named this iron spear, Open Spear. With the spear in the open in his hand, Xiao Ho dared to look directly at Ming Zong spying in the dark. Not to mention the ordinary saber in Ning Ke's hand. When the crimson flag was torn to shreds, the flagpole turned into a spear and flew into the night clouds. Eldest brother, who was on the city wall, noticed it. He subconsciously took a step forward and placed his hands on the top of the city wall. He did not feel the cold snow on the top of the wall and looked in the direction of Yanming Lake with a worried expression. One could imagine the power of Xiao Ho's spear, which could make the eldest brother of the academy so solemn and worried, and how much of an impact it would have on the hearts of the spectators tonight. The eldest brother murmured, "I did not expect General Xiao Ho to have hidden such a move in the end." The speed, strength, and momentum of this spear can be said to be perfect. Yi Su said, "I remember Master once said that when he led Xiao Ho into the Tao sect, he once tried to make him break away from the devil's doctrine's cultivation method and switch to Tao law. I didn't expect Xiao Ho to actually switch to Tao law and cultivate this spear to such a level. It is really incredible." The eldest brother was slightly moved and said, "So it was taught by the Abbey Dean. No wonder it is so domineering." "It is not domineering, it is open and aboveboard." Yi Su said, "If Xiao Ho could cultivate the open spear to absolute light, he would probably be able to compete with Lu Bai at his peak." The eldest brother shook his head and said, "Let's not talk about General Xiao Ho's injury and just talk about the state of the open spear. It is still a distance away from Mr. Lu Bai's sword style." Yi Su said, "The distance is the distance from Lu Bai, but it is not something that Ning Ke can handle." The eldest brother was silent. After withstanding the extremely domineering open spear, Ning Ke had suffered a terrible impact and his internal injuries were gradually showing. He needed time to recover, so he was willing to say a few more words. Although Xia Ho was also seriously injured, he should have chosen to launch a thunderous attack and smash Ning Ke into meat paste before his blood ran dry. However, he did not know why he gave Ning Ke time to say a few words. Because he had some doubts in his heart, so he was vigilant. For the battle on the snow lake tonight, Ning Ke had prepared for 15 years. Xia Ho did not have a long time to prepare, but he had decades of experience on the bloody battlefield. He was one of the 4 great generals of the Tang Empire. People were often attracted by his ruthless and cold-blooded side and forgot his talent in military affairs. In fact, his commanding ability on the battlefield was not weaker than his powerful strength. What was more frightening was that he was very good at using the art of war in a cultivator's battle. From the moment he stepped into the house by the Yanming Lake and planted the flag in the ground, Xia Ho had been acting according to the art of war. He used his body as the middle military tent and kept showing weakness to the enemy. He even did not hesitate to use a large number of troops to resist Ning Ke's most powerful means. Until the enemy was exhausted and he clearly saw all the means of the enemy, he used his most powerful means, intending to kill the enemy with one strike. For the last strike, he had paid such a big price, consumed so much energy, and lost so much blood. Then the last strike must be like a thunderbolt, not giving the enemy any chance. The blood flag in front of the house was equivalent to the thousands of black armored cavalries lying in ambush around the battlefield. They were waiting for the enemy to attack suddenly when they could not take down the enemy for a long time, like the wind sweeping up the fallen leaves to determine the victory. The elite black armored cavalries of the Tang Empire were the most powerful and terrifying iron stream in the military camp. The iron cavalry had been accumulating power for a long time, so they would definitely sweep the field and be unstoppable. The iron spear and the blood flag was Xia Ho's most powerful and terrifying means. He only released it at the last moment, so it was naturally the key to victory. This spear condensed the strong faith and momentum of a powerhouse at the peak state of martial arts. Logically speaking, even a cultivator stronger than Ning Ke could not resist it. However, Ning Ke did not die even though the iron spear had struck him like a thunderbolt in the dark clouds. Although he was coughing up blood and was obviously seriously injured, the fact that he was not dead still made Xia Ho feel extremely puzzled. During the short conversation with Ning Ke, Xia Ho thought about this problem, trying to find the source of his confusion and inexplicable vigilance and a solution. After a moment, he figured out half of the answer. So he looked at Ning Ke with eyes that became brighter and colder, just like the scattered ice on the snow lake in front of him. It was enough for him to figure out half of the answer. At least he thought it was enough to solve the confusion and vigilance in his heart. He waved his right arm, and the remaining silky clothes on his arm instantly turned into powder. The blood from the wound sprayed into the night like arrows, and the iron spear in his hand broke through the air and disappeared instantly. Xia Ho's second spear was not aimed at Ning Ke at the bottom of the cliff, but at Sang Sang at the top of the cliff. He had enough intelligence sources to know that it must be Ning Ke's little handmaiden on the cliff. He knew that the little handmaiden had a special relationship with Ning Ke, and he also knew that the little handmaiden was the successor of Wei Guangming. Sang Sang's identity and origin had always made Xia Ho feel a little strange and vigilant. So he decided to kill her first. This decision was still based on the art of war. The art of war was not sinister or complicated. Instead, it was simple and upright, just like the temperament of the iron spear itself. Xia Ho wanted to clearly tell Ning Ke that he wanted to kill Sang Sang. He wanted Ning Ke to turn back to save her, and then die. Sang Sang was Ning Ke's life. If someone dared to use Sang Sang to threaten him, he would definitely kill the other party at all costs, just like how he had shot Long Qing in the wilderness. And for ordinary people, when such a thin and weak girl, who was more precious than life, was threatened by death, they would immediately turn back to save her, disregarding their own lives. But Ning Ke did not do so. When he sensed the majestic and domineering iron spear piercing the cliff, he did not turn back. Instead, he gripped the hilt of his knife tightly and stepped heavily on the ice with his right foot. His body instantly flew more than 100 feet above the snow lake. With a flick of his wrist, he raised the sharp Biyao and rushed toward Xiaoho. His speed was very shocking. The cold wind on the snow lake blew at his black academy uniform, making the sleeves of his clothes flutter, like the night sky that was about to disperse. Xiaoho raised his eyebrows slightly, somewhat puzzled. He stretched out his iron-like right hand and grasped the air in the night wind. The iron spear pierced through the air and instantly came to the cliff on the south bank of Yanming Lake. It stabbed towards Sang. Because of the intense friction with the air, the dark body of the spear glowed with a bright luster. Compared to Sang's thin and short body, it looked extraordinarily thick and terrifying. The wind of the spear wrapped around the remaining snow on the cliff and blew against her face, causing her cheeks to hurt. Her slightly yellow hair, which had been cut short, fell backwards like water grass in a steep stream. She knew that Ning Ke would not turn back to save her, because he could not save her in time. Because Ning Ke believed that she could save her, and because at this moment, she had to save herself. Although Sang was the successor of the divine priest of light and had learned divine skills from the old man, and had verified with the Tao addict, Yi Hongyu, these days, she had never participated in a battle between cultivators. She did not know how to fight and did not know how to save herself. Relying on her instinct, she crouched down like an injured little beast, just like when she was in a life and death situation in Min Mountain many years ago. She hugged the handle of the umbrella tightly, desperately shrinking her body so that the big black umbrella could cover every part of her body. A very strange sound rang out on the cliff, like a drumstick falling heavily on a broken drum. It also sounded like Xiaoho's footsteps that had crossed the rivers and mountains, breaking through the ice and falling into the water. The iron spear stabbed into the big black umbrella fiercely. The sharp tip of the spear pierced through the years of grease and black mud. The place where the big black umbrella and the iron spear touched sank rapidly. The black cloth made a hissing sound, as if it had become a terrible black hole. However, at the bottom of the black hole, the tip of the spear could not penetrate the umbrella. The handle of the big black umbrella pressed against the cliff stone. With a puff, it pierced in like a knife cutting through tofu. Gravel flew everywhere. Sang, who had been hiding under the umbrella with her eyes closed, shook heavily. Her face suddenly became extremely pale. With a cry, blood spurted from her lips and dyed her new clothes red this morning. Let's not talk about today's endless bitter things. I will continue to write the next chapter and try to finish it before 11 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 483. Xiaoho, who had betrayed the devil's doctrine, had that terrifying open spear as his natal item. He could clearly perceive all the details before the iron spear, so he knew that Sang was not dead. The first shot, which he sought to kill with great perseverance and forbearance, failed to kill Ning Quebec. The second shot, which was based on the art of war, also failed to kill the little handmaiden on the cliff. Xiaoho's mood became a little strange after failing twice in a row. Ning Ke had already crossed dozens of feet and arrived at the snow lake. At this moment, Xiaoho frowned slightly and tightened his right palm in the cold wind. The iron spear on the cliff suddenly shrank back, as if it had been bounced back into the air by the big black umbrella. The dark iron spear pierced through the remaining snow floating on the lake and the slightest cold wind. With a sharp whistle, it stabbed towards Ning Ke's back like lightning. The sharp whistle was the sound of wind breaking and the sound of turbulence in front of the sharp tip of the spear. The sharper the sound, the faster the speed. Just from the sound, one could tell that this iron spear was extremely terrifying even if it was not as fast as the primordial 13 arrows. Logically speaking, with Ning Ke's current cultivation and strength in the upper see-through state, there was no way to predict the trajectory of Xia Ho's open spear in advance, let alone deal with such a terrifying speed. But Ning Ke had never been a reasonable person. His life experience and cultivation process, if one thought about it carefully, did not make any sense at all. Just when the iron spear was 30 feet away from his back, before the shrill sound reached his ears, he once again reacted in advance. He infused his whole body with the Great Spirit and forcefully twisted his body in the night sky. He concentrated all his spirit and strength on the blade and fiercely slashed behind him. An extremely clear and crisp sound accompanied by a strong splashing airflow spread from the blade and the tip of the spear to the surroundings, causing the snow on the winter lake to tremble. Ning Ke felt a sharp pain in his wrist and almost lost his grip on the padao in his hand. However, he steadied his body with an extremely determined mind. Borrowing the recoil force from the blade, he spun in the night wind and whizzed towards Xia Ho again. His speed was even faster than before. The iron spear drew an arc in the night sky and arrived in front of Xia Ho earlier than Ning Ke, returning to his right palm that was held in the cold wind. The cold wind suddenly picked up, and Ning Ke broke through the wind, holding the padao with both hands and chopping down. Xia Ho was already bathed in blood and his face was pale. However, his expression was still as majestic as before. Looking at the figure that was pouncing towards him like a ghost, he simply thrust his spear forward. The tip of the spear shone brightly. After a loud and clear sound, Ning Ke flew backwards like an injured bird and fell heavily on the snow lake again. The dark iron spear trembled at an extremely high frequency in Xia Ho's hand, unable to calm down for a long time. It emitted a low buzzing sound that chilled one's heart. Every time the iron spear and the padao collided, it was simple and unadorned, full of strength. It seemed simple and boring, but in reality, it contained the power to split mountains and split lakes. Ning Ke stood up, feeling as if his wrist had been broken. His face was as pale as snow. Although Xia Ho had been severely injured by his talisman arrow, he was still far from his opponent in terms of strength and the density of his qi. There was no way to make up for or close the gap. Xia Ho's simple spear had broken Ning Ke's long-planned and life-risking attack. There should be no reason for him to be dissatisfied, but his brows were deeply furrowed. Because this spear had still not pierced Ning Ke's body. Just at that moment, when the open spear was like the blazing sun and was about to tear apart the darkness on Ning Ke's body, the padao in Ning Ke's hand had mysteriously flipped out of nowhere and hit the tip of the spear. Then, his body had borrowed the momentum to fly backwards, but he had not been thrown out by the spear tip. Xia Ho narrowed his eyes and looked at Ning Quebec. He said, "In the spring, when you secluded yourself in the cliff cave of the Academy's back mountain, you were indeed not cultivating both talisman and martial arts. Instead, you have joined the devil." Ning Ke spat a mouthful of blood-stained saliva into the snow in front of him and did not reply. Previously, Xia Ho had figured out half of the answer. The answer was that Ning Ke had joined the devil. Otherwise, if he was an ordinary cultivator, he would not have been able to withstand the great power carried by the iron spear. But that was only half of the answer. Xia Ho had attacked Ning Ke 3 times tonight, and every spear was a work of great spirit. He believed that even the masters of the devil's doctrine back then could not have withstood it. Ning Ke should have died, but he was still alive. Every time at the most critical moment, when the shadow of death from the spear tip was about to cover his body, he could always react in advance, and it was the most correct response. Xia Ho was suddenly alarmed. Even if Ning Ke joined the devil, it could not explain how he could do this, because this meant that he had the deepest understanding of the surrounding qi of heaven and earth. In other words, Ning Ke seemed to have the fighting consciousness of the knowing destiny state tonight. The snow on the city wall gradually stopped, but it seemed colder than before. Eldest brother and Yi Su looked in the direction of Yanming Lake, and the breath they exhaled permeated the surroundings like fog. Yi Su did not expect that Ning Ke could actually withstand Xia Ho's open spear. Although he was extremely embarrassed, he did not die after all. This made him puzzled, and even a little shocked. Although Xiaoho's open spear was dark and left no trace in the night clouds, it was a righteous one. It used speed, strength, and momentum to suppress the opponent, forcing the opponent to fight to the death. With Ning Kei's current level of consciousness, he could not even capture the movement of the open spear, let alone predict the opponent's movements. He could only take it head-on. Moreover, his cultivation state was only in the see-through state, and he did not have the ability to use the qi of heaven and earth as a means of attack. So when Xiaoho used the first spear, he should have already died. Xiaoho's open spear naturally could not stab you, Mr. First. Yi Su glanced at eldest brother and continued, if it was Lu Bai, he would definitely hold his sword hilt upside down and use the surging yellow waves to attack and kill him. If it was me facing the iron spear, would probably condense my sword style into an iron chain and try to bind the spear. But I don't understand how Ning Kei could avoid his spear. Eldest brother thought for a while and shook his head, saying, I also don't know how youngest brother did it. Yi Su closed his eyes and listened attentively to the faint sound of the spear and the knife clashing on the distant snow lake. He suddenly thought of a possibility. After a while, he opened his eyes and said with a frown, even so, it can't be explained. Eldest brother asked, is that so? Yi Su said expressionlessly, you know what I mean. Eldest brother said, the academy will not admit it. Yi Su said coldly, not admitting it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Eldest brother said slowly, if there is no evidence, it will only cause trouble. Yi Su took a deep breath and suddenly said something that made no sense, the headmaster of the academy will leave one day. Eldest senior brother said without hesitation. This was almost the same as what Ning Kei had said to Yi Hongyu. I don't think the headmaster will leave before us. After inheriting youngest uncle's mantle in the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, the Great Spirit had been constantly changing Ning Kei's body. His body was becoming stronger and stronger, and his power was increasing. Correspondingly, his body movements and speed were also becoming faster and faster. But Xiaoho was a powerhouse of the previous generation of the Devil's Doctrine. His body had been nourished by the genuine qi for many years, so both his power and speed were far above Ning Kei's. That was why he could block Xiaoho's open spear. Ning Kei did not know that Xiaoho's last move was actually a Taoist skill, nor did he expect that Xiaoho would have his own natal item. But deep in his sense of perception, there were countless fragments of consciousness that Master Lotus had transferred to him. Those fragments of consciousness were the spiritual brand. Xiaoho's Devil's Doctrine skills were all inherited from Lotus. Lotus knew his disciple better than anyone else. Although he could not know the situation when Xiaoho cultivated the open spear, he knew Xiaoho's temperament, preferences, habits, and even the position of his feet. He knew everything about Xiaoho. If Master Lotus was said to be a huge net that was as wide as the ocean, then Xiaoho would be the stone giant walking on this huge net. He looked strong and indestructible, but in actual fact, every step he took was still within the net. Every tremor would let the net know his intentions. Xiaoho had all the spiritual brands of Master Lotus, which meant that he had the net. Although he could not actively control these spiritual brands, when Xiaoho walked on the net, the fragments of consciousness in the depth of his sense of perception would start to shine, telling him in advance what Xiaoho was going to do and what he should do. Last year at the Hulun Sea in the cold winter, Ning Kei, who was not as strong as he was now, could still remain calm when facing Xiaoho's fist that was more powerful than tonight. This was because of the effect of the fragments of consciousness. Tonight, these fragments of consciousness were still working. A cold wind blew from the winter forest on the east side of the lake, rolling up the snow on the lake and sprinkling it. Xiaoho looked at the snow and suddenly thought of the snow-like ashes in his hands at the Hulun Sea. That box of his teacher's ashes. His body suddenly became cold. Teacher, what did he teach you? Xiaoho looked at Ning Kei and asked. His eyes were burning with cold flames. Ning Kei's eyes were also very bright. He pointed to his head and said, Master Lotus did not teach me anything, but he did leave something for me. The consciousness that he left told me that he also wanted to kill you, the evil disciple, to clean up the Enlightenment doctrine. So these are all your teacher's murderous intentions towards you. Xiaoho was silent for a long time. Suddenly, he said indifferently, the Academy claims to be on the right path. You are a disciple of the Academy, but your teacher is Lotus and you use the Devil's Doctrine skills. You are really rebellious. Ning Ke said, you are a disciple of the Devil's Doctrine and your teacher is Lotus. But you betrayed the Devil's Doctrine and joined Haotian Taoism. You even changed to Haotian Taoism skills and abandoned your own heaven and earth to cultivate natal items. You are even more rebellious than me. Xiaoho suddenly sneered and said, I did not expect that tonight would be a battle between two traitors. Ning Ke shook his head and said, the Devil's Doctrine sees you as an enemy. The Academy did not deny my identity. Xiaoho said, no matter what teacher taught you, you will still die tonight. Ning Ke said, I thought that I was the only one in the world who was better at talking than fighting. Xiaoho squinted and said, then let's do it. Please take another spear from me. The cold voice gradually faded away. Xiaoho's burly body seemed to become a real mountain. A deep crack suddenly appeared on the solid lake ice under his feet, and the lake water could be faintly seen. The snow lake finally began to ripple. The distance between the two people on the surface of the lake shrank rapidly. Xiaoho held the iron spear and stabbed it straight. Ning Ke shook his wrist and chopped down with his padao. The iron spear and the padao met again. Ning Ke frowned as he felt the terrifying power coming from the hilt of the padao. Without any hesitation, he released his psyche power and the drop of crystal liquid in his body began to spin at a high speed. The great spirit that he had cultivated in the cliff cave at the back of the academy for several months spurted out in an almost presumptuous manner. The padao in his hands suddenly shone brightly. Countless golden rays of light splashed out from the dark blade, like the golden light reflected by the city wall of Chang'an at dusk. It was also like the sudden appearance of the sun. In an instant, the dark Yanming Lake was as bright as day. After the golden and holy light left the padao, it passed through the cold air and turned into a golden sand-like object, hitting Xiaoho's face hard. For thousands of years, Taoism and the Devil's Doctrine had always been at odds. The West Hill Divine Palace's divine skill was undoubtedly one of the nemeses of the Devil's Doctrine. After Yi Hongyu understood the divine skill, she was seen as the natural successor of the judicial department who was responsible for hunting down the remnants of the Devil's Doctrine. The powerhouses of the Devil's Doctrine were most afraid of the holy Haotian divine light. Even the youngest uncle of the academy had used the divine light to imprison people like Master Lotus. The divine skill was a gift from Haotian to Haotian Taoism. It was also a punishment for the Devil's Doctrine. Those golden rays ignored the strong bodies and vigorous qi of the Devil's Doctrine cultivators and directly affected the flow of qi in their bodies. They could even directly melt the crystal walls of their meridians. In the Battle of the Winter Lake tonight, Xiaoho had saved his most powerful move for last. He swept his iron spear in all directions, and Ning Ke had also saved his Taoism divine skill for this moment. In the blazing Haotian divine light, Xiaoho's cheeks seemed to be so pale that they were about to become transparent. His eyes seemed to be really burning. His eyelashes fell off one by one in the divine light, then turned into charcoal, then into ashes, and finally into nothingness. A touch of fear flashed through his eyes, followed by a mocking smile. Looking at Ning Ke outside the divine light, Xiaoho laughed wildly and almost roared, "You think I don't know that you know the divine skill? But your divine skill is fake. This is still the Great Spirit. How can candlelight turn into sunlight? Fake is fake, it will never become real. You are not Koharan, what can you do to me?" An extremely vigorous shinchi gushed out from his body, which was as tall and sturdy as a mountain. With a hissing sound, the surrounding snow was shaken off the surface of the lake and floated into the night sky. Xiao stood in the floating snow, holding the spear with one hand and pressing it down. He was like a god looking down from above the clouds, unstoppable. Ning Kei's knees were slightly bent and his face was pale. The ice under his feet made a creaking sound, as if it was about to break. Xiao turned his right palm over and hit Ning Kei's head like a small mountain. He said with an indifferent expression, "Die." Xiao was seriously injured tonight, and his strength was less than 20 to 30% of his peak. But he was a powerhouse at the peak of martial arts after all. Even with this remaining strength, he was still extremely powerful. With Ning Kei's current strength, it was already an extremely shocking scene to be able to withstand Xiao's spear in the open. His entire mind and all the great spirit were focused on the Biyao, and he had no spare energy to deal with the palm that was like a small mountain hitting his head. Even if he did, it would be too late. However, at this moment, Xiao let out an extremely shrill scream, retracted his palm and retreated quickly. Blood spurted out from his lower abdomen. He split the ice and snow along the way and retreated 2,000 feet in a flash. The blood that spurted out dragged a long line of blood on the snow lake. Just at that moment, Ning Kei retracted his knife in an extremely unreasonable manner. At that time, Xiao's palm was only half a foot away from his head. At that time, the iron spear in Xiao's hand was no longer blocked by the Biyao and was about to go down. He stabbed his knife deep into Xiao's lower abdomen. When he pulled out his knife, Xiao's palm was still half a foot away from his head. The iron spear in Xiao's hand did not move at all, as if it was suspended in the air. Ning Kei retracted his knife and once again blocked in front of the iron spear. Only then did Xiao react. So he retracted his palm and retreated quickly. He retreated across half of the snow lake. Even lightning could not describe the speed of Ning Kei's knife. It was a kind of momentum that surpassed the sense of speed. It was like a torrential turbid wave falling from the sky. The speed was not necessarily fast, but the momentum made everyone who saw it feel that they could not stop it from happening. On the snow lake in the distance, Xiao covered his bleeding abdomen and asked in shock and anger, "What knife is this?" Ning Kei looked at him and said, "You know that I know divine skills, but do you know that I know swordsmanship?" What he used previously was not knife skills, but sword style. It was the sword style of the world's most powerful sage of sword, Liu Bai. On the cold city wall, Yi Su looked in the direction of Yanming Lake and felt the unfamiliar but sharp sword style that he would never mistake. He subconsciously scattered the snow on the wall in front of him and said in disbelief, "A turbid river falling from the sky. How could it be Liu Bai's sword style?" He suddenly turned around and looked at eldest brother in shock. He said, "Ning Kei already knows enough things. He actually learned Liu Bai's sword. Who taught him? Could it be the academy?" Eldest brother answered honestly, "Although youngest brother has learned Haoran's sword, the Dai sword was not taught by the academy." Yi Su frowned and asked, "Then who taught him?" Eldest brother hesitated for a moment and said, "Your sister. I worked very hard to write it here. See you all tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 484. Ning Kei suddenly turned around. He held the hilt in his right hand and the other end of the blade in his left hand. He stood in front of him with the Great Spirit sword, trying to block Xiao's spear. There was a crisp crack. Ning Kei's left wrist was broken, and the back of the blade fell heavily on his shoulder. He shouldered it again. Xiao's iron spear moved forward again. There was another crisp cracking sound. There was a sharp pain in Ning Kei's left shoulder, and he could no longer withstand the huge force coming from the blade. He knelt on one knee, and his knee smashed several cracks on the hard ice. His face suddenly turned pale. He was in great pain, so his face was very, very white. But for some reason, there was no shadow of death in his eyes. Instead, they were very, very bright. With a cry of pain like that of a wild beast, Ning Ke turned the pain into an unimaginable instantaneous strength. He forcefully turned his right wrist, clenched his injured left hand into a fist, and hit the back of the blade heavily. Just these two simple movements made the heavy Biyao in his hand seem to have gained some sort of life in an instant. Like a nimble snake, it rolled up along Xiaoho's iron spear, creating a series of knife sparks. Instead, it pushed Xiaoho's iron spear downwards. The drop of crystal liquid condensed from the great spirit qi in his abdomen suddenly exploded. That drop of liquid evaporated instantly and turned into nothingness. Those wisps of steam flowed along his meridians and poured into every part of his body. All the great spirit in his body burst out in the shortest time possible. The blazing Haotian's divine light once again spurted out from the blade, making his figure seem even more burly and insufferably arrogant than Xiaoho, who was in front of the blade. The divine light shone on Xiaoho's thin and strange face, illuminating his eyes, and even the trace of indifference and mockery in his eyes was clearly illuminated. Xiaoho knew that this was Ning Ke's desperate attack. But he was not afraid. Just as he had said before, Ning Ke was not Kohaoran. No matter how his great spirit imitated Haotian's divine light, it could not be the real Haotian's divine light. He stared at Ning Ke's pale cheeks and shouted coldly, "Lu Bai's sword style is not Lu Bai's sword after all. No matter how many things you know, they are still other things." The shout reverberated on the cold snow lake, shaking the divine light on Ning Ke's blade like a torch in the wind. The iron spear suddenly rose a few inches, and the Biyao retreated a few inches. "You can't stab me again, and you can't hurt me again." Xiaoho stared into Ning Ke's eyes and said coldly and disdainfully, "As a disciple of the academy, you actually joined the devil and refused to cultivate your natal item. You don't even know what your heart is, so what's the point of not dying?" With that said, the divine light on the blade shook even more violently. It was like a candle in the wind, about to be extinguished at any moment. Ning Ke's face was pale, and he spat out a mouthful of blood into the divine flame. The blood turned into steam with a sizzling sound, but his eyes were still so calm. Then he said two words that no one had expected. "Thank you." Ning Ke was very clear about how powerful Xiaoho was, and how difficult it was for him, who was in the see-through state, to complete a challenge that was rarely seen in the world. So he had made a lot of plans. These plans spanned a period of 15 years, and were finally finalized when he left the House of Red Sleeves during the day and smelled the mutton soup in the streets of Chang'an. These plans were aimed at Xiaoho's powerful strength and the hidden tricks this powerhouse might have, and then tried to find a chance to kill him. In tonight's battle on the Snow Lake, some of these plans played an important role, such as the storm of talismans, the iron arrows and the iron kettles. But some were useless. For example, when he fell from the night sky, it looked miserable, but actually he wanted to lure Xiaoho into the dark and cold lake bottom to kill him. According to the information provided by Joyer years ago, Xiaoho was very afraid of water. But the actual situation was that Xiaoho became more and more powerful and terrifying at the bottom of the lake. Ning Ke did not find a chance to use some of the plans in the battle, and some of the plans were only half used. From the very beginning, he had been looking for a chance to fight with Xiaoho and compete with his genuine qi, because he knew the threat of Haotian's divine light to the powerhouses of the devil's doctrine through Yi Hongyu. He found two opportunities, and he was faced with two choices. When Haotian's divine light spurted out from the Biyao for the first time, he chose to use the Great Spirit to cooperate with Lu Bai's sword style. According to his calculation, the Great Spirit inherited from youngest uncle and Lu Bai's sword style that he had recently comprehended were his most powerful skills. In fact, he did successfully injure Xiaoho, but it was a pity that he could not kill him. Now that he was faced with a second chance, he was not sure what he should choose. Until he heard Xiaoho's cold and condescending scolding, he finally made up his mind. After using the secret method of the devil's doctrine, Xia Ho became extremely skinny. His eyes were sunken, and his cheeks seemed to be covered with a thin layer of skin. The bones underneath could be seen clearly, and he actually looked a little like his teacher Lotus at the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. Under the blazing light, he looked even more like a god or a devil. Xia Ho did not hesitate to burn his life and flesh, and severely deplete his lifespan, to completely change the situation of the battle at the Snow Lake. In front of the powerful Xia Ho, Ning Ke did not have the slightest ability to fight back. The Haotian's divine light created by the Great Spirit could cause a certain amount of damage to him, but it could not change the overall situation of the battle. Ning Ke saw that he was about to die, but at this moment, he said thank you. This thank you was so baffling. Xia Ho did not know if Ning Ke had really gone crazy before he was about to die, and he could not understand why Ning Ke would thank him. However, he felt that there was something strange in this thank you, and he felt a little uneasy. Ning Ke looked at Xia Ho's hideous and scary skinny cheeks on the other side of the blazing light, and said with mixed emotions, I also have a natal item. Do you want to see what it is? As he said this, an extremely condensed psyche power was released from Ning Ke's body. The psyche power left the mottled blood color on his body, and floated above the Snow Lake. The adjective to describe the psyche power as floating did not mean that the psyche power was moving slowly, but the feeling it gave people was that the psyche power was extremely pure. However, it was like an ignorant child with brute force. In the chi of heaven and earth that permeated above the Snow Lake, it did not know where to touch. In the daytime, in front of the Wind and Snow Palace, Xia Ho had once evaluated Ning Ke's psyche power. He said that Ning Ke's psyche power was vigorous and pure, but his control of the chi of heaven and earth was extremely bad. This was the situation now. However, Xia Ho's eyes suddenly turned cold. Because he could clearly feel that the psyche power released by Ning Ke had captured an extremely thin wisp of chi of heaven and earth on the Snow Lake. That wisp of chi of heaven and earth reached the cliff of the lake in an instant. Just as it landed on the edge of the cliff, that extremely thin wisp of chi of heaven and earth instantly stabilized and began to expand at an extremely terrifying speed. It was as if there was something on the cliff that was continuously pouring into this wisp of chi of heaven and earth. Holding the hilt tightly with both hands, Ning Ke's face was pale, but his eyes were bright. Risking the risk of destroying his cultivation, he dispersed the crystal-clear liquid in his abdomen with a thought and sent all the Great Spirit out at the same time to ensure that it could suppress Xia Ho's iron spear for a period of time. He had to cherish this period of time. His psyche power released from his sense of perception, passed through the extremely stagnant snow mountain and ocean of chi that only had 10 apertures open, and passed through the difficult invisible chi apertures. Finally, it converged into a very weak and clumsy little song. He hoped that this little song could be heard and understood. Because he was using this song to call his natal item. Cultivators did not rely on the chi of heaven and earth to directly affect the things in the world. Instead, they used the chi of heaven and earth as a bridge to transmit their psyche power to the object, thereby triggering the vibration of the chi of heaven and earth inside the object. The object that was most harmonious with the cultivator's psyche power and most likely to resonate was the natal item. This was what Chen Pipi said. He believed that it was very difficult for a cultivator to find a natal item that was completely compatible with his aura. That night in the old library, he spoke to Ning Ke with fervor and assurance. Using music as an example, the so-called natal item was the object that could understand and listen to his song very much. It was also the so-called bosom friend. The natal item of a sword master was the natal sword, such as Lu Bai's day sword. Of course, as the strongest sage of sword in the world, he could now draw his natal sword on paper. The natal item of a talisman master was the natal talisman, such as Master Yen Sei's Jing Fu. This talisman was the closest to him, and until the moment before his death, they were still fighting side by side. Ning Ke was a rare dual cultivator. His natal item was not a knife, not a sword, not a natal talisman, not a writing brush, ink, paper, inkstone, mountains, rivers, trees, or even his most beloved silver. His natal item was a little handmaiden. It was the little handmaiden with yellow hair and a slightly tanned face. On the snow lake, Ning Kei's psyche power controlled the qi of heaven and earth and came to Yanming Mountain. The little song was played silently by the cliff. Chen Pipi once said that his song was very unpleasant and difficult to understand. Moreover, it was relatively far tonight, so the song was unusually dim and ethereal. It was not a tune at all. Sang Sang felt the psyche power. She heard the song and also understood it. Although there was no real music playing on Yanming Mountain, she could clearly hear a mountain song. It was a song that Ning Kei liked to hum many years ago when he carried her on his back climbing in the depths of Min Mountain. Ning Kei's acupoints were blocked and his 5 tones were not complete. The reason why he was not afraid of losing face and often hummed this song to Sang Sang was because Sang Sang liked to listen to him sing this song when she could not sleep. This song was Sang Sang's lullaby. Sang Sang held the big black umbrella and stood by the cliff with a slightly lost expression. She looked at the light in the snow lake under the cliff and did not quite understand what had happened. But she understood the call, or invitation, that Ning Kei made in the psyche power. Ning Kei was inviting her to build the closest connection, which was absolute obedience. Even the shadow of death and the threat of Yalma could not tear apart the connection. Any life with self-consciousness would instinctively resist such an absolute one-sided connection. Even if they finally accepted it, they would need a long time to struggle. But Sang Sang did not hesitate or struggle and agreed to the invitation. Because she had always been his little handmaiden. Please calm down. Although I am indeed a little hot at this time, I continue to write. There is one more chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 485. Sang Sang's right hand was in the cold night wind. A ray of light appeared on her index finger. The light suddenly became round and turned into a weak flame. The color of the flame was unusually white, without any impurities. It gave off a sense of holiness. Immediately after, her thumb, middle finger, ring finger, and little finger also produced this kind of holy flame at the same time, illuminating her slightly black little hand to make it abnormally white. These holy flames were Haotian's divine light. The Haotian's divine light between her fingers was blown by the night wind. More holy flames seeped out from the gaps of her new clothes, from her dark little face, and from the ends of her yellowish hair, covering her thin body. The big black umbrella in her left hand seemed to have sensed something. It slowly closed without any wind and silently leaned against her leg. The cliff of Yanming Lake shone brightly. Sang Sang shone brightly. It seemed that endless Haotian's divine light gushed out from her thin body. In an instant, it illuminated the snow-covered cliff in front of her, the messy snow lake under the cliff, the broken wells and dilapidated walls on the other side of the lake, the snow bridge and reeds on the west bank, the winter woods and snow monks on the east bank, and the entire Chang'an city. The holy and blazing light shot from the Yanming Lake to the sky and spread to every corner of Chang'an city. The deep night seemed to usher in a solemn sunrise, which was as bright as day. On the cliff of Yanming Lake. The Haotian's divine light around Sang Sang's body seemed to have no temperature, because her hair was not curled and her clothes were not burnt. However, the burning flames seemed to be really burning. The bloodstains on her clothes were burned away without a trace. The mud and dirty snow on her shoes also turned into smoke and dissipated. All the filth was purified, and she became more transparent than clean. She was as transparent as herself. One day in the 14th year of the Tianqi era, the old man who escaped from the West Hill Divine Palace came to Chang'an. He bought a bowl of hot and sour noodle slice soup and spilled half of it, dirtying his cotton-padded jacket. He saw a dark and thin girl in the old brush pen shop on Lin 47th Street and was unwilling to leave again. The old man looked at her and followed her. He told her that the path of destiny was bright, and taught her everything he had learned in his life without holding anything back. He said with great emotion, "I have never seen an existence more transparent than you." Therefore, Sang Sang was transparent. Therefore, the Haotian divine flame that was emitted from her body was not damaged or refracted. It was as pure and holy as the original divine flame. Some people in the West Hill Divine Palace who were dedicated to Taoism had also mastered Sang Sang's divine skill. For example, Yi Hongyu, the Tao addict, was good at it. However, no one in Haotian Taoism could produce purer Sang Sang's divine flame than Sang Sang. Because she was a descendant of light. She was the daughter of light. Under the white light, the reeds by the bridge on the west bank seemed to have become beautiful objects carved from white jade. Yi Hongyu held the railing tightly and looked at the dazzling light on the lake in the distance. She was shocked, speechless. She knew that Sang Sang knew divine skills, and she had discussed it with the little handmaiden. However, she never knew that Sang Sang's divine skills were so strong. It should have been late at night, and they could not borrow the light of Haotian. She could not understand how Sang Sang could release so much light. Although she knew that she was the only descendant of the divine priest of light in the world, and the person whom the West Hill Divine Palace wanted to invite back to Peach Mountain, she still could not understand. No one could understand the light by the Yanming Lake, including Yi Su, who was standing on the city wall. However, he did not try to understand the scene in front of him like his sister. Looking at the divine flame that illuminated the night sky and feeling the aura there, the face of the descendant of Jishou Abbey was full of piety, longing, shock, and confusion. He murmured, "What a pure light." Eldest brother, who was standing beside Yi Su, also looked in the direction of Yanming Lake. He did not change his expression, nor did he smile. Instead, he looked very serious. No one knew what he was worried about. Under the snow bridge outside the military camp, the soldiers of the Yulin Royal Guards and the cultivators of the Imperial Center Administration looked in the direction of Yanming Lake in shock. The light shone on their faces clearly. Su Shi looked up at the beautiful light reflected by the dark clouds in the night sky. His movements seemed particularly heavy, and his wrinkled face was full of questions. Second brother, who was sitting cross-legged on the snow bridge, had his head lowered most of the time from day to night. At this time, he finally raised his head and looked at the light of Yanming Lake. He showed a rare sincere smile. Then he looked at Su Shi and said, "This is a miracle." Although this was not a miracle created by the Academy, a miracle was a miracle. After Master Yen Sei and the great divine priest of light died together, second brother climbed the nameless mountain and saw the little handmaiden holding the ashes of the ashes. He felt pity for her and somehow felt that a miracle would happen to the little handmaiden in the future. For this, he did not hesitate to argue with eldest brother, whom he respected the most. Tonight, he finally saw a miracle happen to Sang Sang, so he began to smile. In the winter forest on the east bank of Yanming Lake, Qin Yan's body was covered with thousands of snowflakes like cicada wings. He looked like a statue of Buddha carved from ice and snow. No matter how fierce the battle on the snow lake was, the wayfarer of Buddhism sect remained silent. He put his palms together to guard his heart against the person behind the sound of cicadas and waited for the result calmly. When Haotian's divine light appeared on the cliff, he suddenly opened his eyes. Thin snowflakes fell from his eyes. There were many complicated emotions in his gentle but firm eyes. Those emotions were compassionate, peaceful, struggling, and finally, they turned into admiration. The faint sound of cicadas in the winter forest also changed at this time. The rhythm of the cicadas strangely showed indifference and disgust, but the tone seemed to be satisfied. In the pavilion outside the snow hall of the Imperial Palace, Li Qingshan, the nation master of Tang, looked at the light that suddenly lit up the night sky in the south. His right hand that was stroking his beard suddenly trembled and pulled out several long strands of beard. Master Huang Yang, who was standing beside the snow bell, looked in the direction of Yanming Lake. He opened his mouth slightly and his sigh turned into a compassionate Buddhist chant. His palms seemed to unconsciously pat the surface of the bell. The thin snowflakes on the ancient bell cracked inch by inch and slid down the surface of the bell to the ground. The melodious and solemn bell sound spread far away in the daytime night. The world in Sang Sang's eyes was white at this time. Pure and flawless white. That was the color of light. Her eyes did not stay on the world of pure divine light. Instead, she silently looked at the back of the figure on the snow lake and felt the message transmitted by the psyche power. The psyche power was desperately summoning. It seemed so greedy and hungry, even with a hint of panic. It was like a devil that wanted to devour her flesh and blood. Sang Sang clearly felt this meaning, but she did not panic. In the burning Haotian divine light, she calmly opened her spiritual world and opened it to Ning Ke, who was on the other side of the psyche power. Some consciousness had long become Sang Sang's instinct. Her spirit, her flesh and blood, her divine light, her life, her everything belonged to her and Ning Quebec. She could share it with him without hesitation or offer it to him. In this case, why should she be afraid? Why should she panic? She was Ning Ke's natal, and Ning Ke was also her natal. Then she would give him as much as he wanted, even if it was all she had. Whatever he wanted, she would give him, even if it was life. If the relationship between a cultivator and his natal was intimate, then Ning Ke and Sang Sang were the best in the world. They were not high mountains and flowing rivers, but pots and pans. Their joy, anger, sorrow, and joy were interlinked. They did not need to try to understand each other. They were born to understand each other. If the relationship between a cultivator and his natal was intimate, then Ning Ke and Sang Sang were the two closest people in the world. They ate and slept together since they were young. They slept together in the hot summer and shared a coat to keep warm in the cold winter. When they raised their eyebrows, Ning Ke knew that you were writing with a branch. When they smiled, Ning Ke knew that you were cutting your hand while washing dishes. If fate really existed, then 15 years ago, Haotian let them meet in the starving Hebei County, and then they began to live and die together. They had lived and died together, and they would live and die together forever. This was fate. It seemed that everything had been predestined. There seemed to be a common way in the unseen world. At this time, the Haotian divine light that Sang Sang burned with her life was going to pass to that person through the unseen channel. The aura between heaven and earth suddenly became quiet. In the light, Sang Sang's face was pale. She frowned and seemed to be in great pain, but there was a smile on her face. The Haotian divine light that was burning on her suddenly condensed into a beam and shot down the cliff. It formed a light bridge, connecting Yanming Mountain and Yanming Lake. Endless Haotian divine light passed through the light bridge and passed through the cold wind on the snow lake. It continuously entered Ning Ke's body and made the padao that he was holding shine brightly. The Haotian divine light that hit his face made Xia Ho's pupils suddenly shrink. However, in a very short period of time, his eyes gradually turned yellow and showed a shocked and frightened expression. He felt that this was not the Haotian divine light that was simulated by the Great Spirit, but the real Haotian divine light. It was the kind of power that he was most afraid of. Although he had long betrayed the devil's doctrine and turned to Haotian Taoism, he was still afraid. Countless Haotian divine light spat out from the padao and shrouded Xia Ho's body. These flames that were supposed to be solemn and compassionate seemed so cruel at this moment, mercilessly burning his body and spirit. These flames of divine light were equivalent to Ning Ke's own divine light at this moment, so he was not affected at all. His padao suddenly became sharp and with dazzling flames, he chopped forward. This was the most familiar and simplest padao that he was most familiar with. There were no fancy moves and it only chopped from top to bottom, but it was also his most powerful one. At the Shibi Lake, he had chopped off the heads of countless horse gang members. At the side gate of the academy, he had chopped Lu Yiqing into a piece of trash. The iron spear in Xia Ho's hand could no longer withstand the power of the Great Spirit on the padao and the burning and purification of Haotian divine light. With a crisp sound, it was broken into two. The edge of the blade continued to move downwards. Xia Ho's roar was like thunder exploding on the snow lake. His pair of iron hands struck forward with the momentum of a bridge and forcibly clamped Ning Kei's padao between his fists. The huge impact of Xia Ho's fists passed along the padao to the hilt and then to Ning Kei's body. But Ning Kei seemed to not feel it at all. He lowered his head and pursed his lips, and continued to press down without a word. The blade that was spitting Haotian divine light burned Xia Ho's fists. It moved down slowly and unstoppably, getting closer and closer to his thin and pale face. In the face of impending death, Xia Ho let out a crazy howl and made a last effort to lift his badly injured foot and kick at Ning Kei's waist and abdomen. Even if Xia Ho kicked Ning Kei, he could no longer block Ning Kei's padao and the Haotian divine light on it. But he still did it, because he wanted Ning Kei to die with him. However, he could not even die with Ning Quebec. At the moment when the tip of his foot kicked Xia Ho's waist, an aura passed along his leg to Xia Ho's body and entered his sense of perception. Finally, it turned into an extremely thick smell of blood in his mouth and nose. Xia Ho was very familiar with the aura, because he had felt it before. He was also very unfamiliar with the aura, because he had not felt it for many years. That aura that had transformed into a thick stench of blood was so cold, yet so vast, as if it was standing in the distant sky and looking down at him from above. Then Xia Ho heard the sound of cicadas. The cicadas that he heard in the palace during the day, he thought it was an auditory hallucination. The cicadas that he heard when he stepped into the Yanming Lake at dusk seemed both real and illusory. At this time, before he died, he heard the cicadas again, and this time he was sure it was real. Ning Kei was kicked away and fell heavily on the snow. He struggled to prop up his body and wanted to get up to give Xia Ho another stab. But no matter how hard he struggled, it was futile. He could only sit in the snow, panting. There was a cut on Xia Ho's body. The cut was very straight, starting from his forehead and extending downwards, cutting open his nose, lips, chest, and abdomen. Blood oozed out from the cut. Tonight's battle was too fierce, and he had lost too much blood. At this time, the remaining blood in his body could only ooze out, making him look even more miserable. Xia Ho did not fall down. He looked down at the deep wound on his chest. This cut might not have been fatal to him when he was at his peak, but it was not something he could bear at this time. For some reason, the Haotian divine light around him did not extinguish, but continued to burn. The cold lake water seemed to have turned into lamp oil, and the snow seemed to have turned into coal. The entire Yanming Lake seemed to be burning, emitting a dazzling light that illuminated everything on the lake clearly. Under the illumination of the divine light, Xia Ho looked at the cut on his chest and knew that death was coming. He slowly let go of his hand, letting the two halves of the spear fall, smashing into the snowflakes. The bell that rang from the palace in the distance finally came to Yanming Lake. Xia Ho looked up at the source of the bell, not knowing if he was thinking of his sister. The bell rang again. There was a buzzing sound in his mountain-like body, and countless fine gravel splashed out from his body and scattered around, as if it was the dust he had hidden for decades. The melodious bell rang continuously, echoing in the quiet Chang and city. Puff! 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 Xia Ho's body made a series of muffled sounds, and the surface of his body suddenly sunk. Some parts of his body bulged, and his broken bones and flesh looked like they had been punched by someone. These were all Tang's fists. In the successive assassinations in the wilderness, Tang risked his life and serious injuries to use the blood knife to break Xia Ho's armor, leaving more than a dozen fists on his body. In the past few days, Xia Ho used his powerful genuine qi and terrifying state to forcibly suppress these fists' injuries. At this time, the Haotian divine light had melted the meridian crystal wall in his body, so he could not suppress these fists' wills, and they instantly erupted. The injuries that he had previously suppressed with the secret method of the devil's doctrine also erupted again. Countless wounds reappeared on his skin, and the scene looked extremely strange. Before death, he had to relive the injuries that he had suffered before and bear the pain again. It had to be said that this was a very cruel thing. Xiaoho's internal organs were all broken, and it could even be said that they had become rotten things. There was not much blood in his muscles, but there was still a lot of blood in his internal organs, so Xiaoho began to cough blood. The thick black blood flowed along his esophagus and trachea into his mouth, and then overflowed his lips. Xiaoho stood in the snow, coughing blood and laughing. Ning Ke sat in the snow and was silent for a long time. Then, he also laughed. The smiles of the two of them had completely different meanings. On the edge of the cliff of Yanming Mountain, Sang Sang sat in the snow, looking extremely weak. She looked at the scene on the lake in the distance and knew that Ning Ke did not want to laugh at this time, but he definitely wanted to cry. Thinking of this, her heart ached, and she began to cry. Cold tears continuously flowed down her slightly dark face, but they could not wash away the smile that gradually appeared on her face. This was really something to be happy about, so she softly hummed. We are from the mountains and rivers, and we want to take your life. We are from the riverside, and we want to take your life. We are from the grassland, and we want to take your life. We are from an uninhabited small village in the Yen territory, and we want to take your life. We are from the uninhabited general's mansion in Chang'an City, and we want to take your life. The lyrics of this song were the clumsy revenge poem that she had written for Ning Quebec. The tune was the lullaby that Ning Ke often sang to her when she was young. Sang Sang's voice was very soft, and a little childish. It was not pleasant to hear. But at this time, the song that came from the cliff was so moving, and it was melodious on the lake in winter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 486. People were about to die. The night was still cold before dawn. However, the snow lake was extremely bright. Haotian's divine flame continued to burn on the ice surface and in the lake water, releasing clouds of water vapor. One could faintly hear the sound of boiling, like a hot spring in the morning. Xiaoho was covered in blood. His scattered white hair was stuck to the shape of a withered willow. He looked at Ning Ke with his dim eyes full of deep confusion. He said in a hoarse voice, "You were only 4 years old at that time. Hatred is not easy for a 4-year-old to remember. Do you really hate me so much?" The cold wind blew on his face. The smile on Ning Ke's face gradually disappeared. He said a few words. The 4 years in Cheng, and when I was a child, were the happiest days of my previous life and this life. At that time, I didn't need to think or learn anything. I only needed to enjoy the love of my parents, play with my playmates, and secretly read the books of the general. Unfortunately, those days were destroyed by you. In the eyes of others, I lived a good life these years. But only I know how painful and unhappy it is to struggle to live every day. So of course I hate you. No matter what I've done over the years, the housekeeper and the young master who I killed in the woodshed will never come back to life. The people who died in the general's mansion will never come back to life. My parents will never come back to life. My best days will never come back to me. So, no one or anything can stop me from killing you. I want them to know that it's worthwhile for me to wield that knife. I also want you to know that I'm avenging my parents. My father's name is Lin Tao, and my mother's name is Li Sanyang. Xiaoho looked down at the knife wound on his chest and abdomen. He suddenly asked, "How does it feel to have your revenge?" Ning Ke said, "It feels good." Xiaoho raised his head and felt a little confused. He said, "How does it feel?" "I don't know what kind of feeling it is. Anyway, I feel very relaxed. I always feel that the world has become different after your death. I am no longer the same person I was in the past 15 years. Ning Ke thought for a while and said, I understand why I feel relaxed. Because after your death, I can have more time to write calligraphy to earn money, instead of writing many boring talismans every night. After your death, I can often go to the House of Red Sleeves to listen to music, instead of listening to senior brother's music at the back of the mountain of the academy. After you die, I will still cultivate, but I won't be doing it to make myself stronger like I did in the past years. I will do it purely for my interests and hobbies, or to satisfy my desire to seek Tao. After you die, I won't have to stare at your back and wait for the battle in the city of Wei or Cheng, unlike I used to. I can go to the great river of the South Jin Kingdom, to the East Sea of the Divine Hall, and to see the world and the people living in it. He looked at Xia Ho and said very seriously, after you die, I won't have to think about killing you anymore. Only then can I obtain true freedom and do what I want to do. Xia Ho laughed. His laughter was very sad, and his expression was very strange. Freedom, Xia Ho looked at Ning Ke with eyes full of pity and mockery. He said, as a disciple of the Orthodox faction, you have been deeply involved in the devil's doctrine, just like how I betrayed the devil's doctrine. You have already followed my old path, and are destined to struggle for survival in the gap between light and darkness. How can you obtain true freedom, and naturally, you won't have any happiness. Ning Ke used the pedao as a crutch, supported his weak body, and stood up with difficulty. He looked at Xia Ho and said, the academy is not the enlightenment doctrine, and I am not you. Those who did not have a deep understanding of the academy could not understand the true attitude of the academy, especially the headmaster of the academy towards the devil's doctrine. Ning Ke never worried that he would become the hero in the story. The academy is indeed not the enlightenment doctrine. With the headmaster of the academy's breadth of mind, he would not care about what his disciple cultivates. But you are indeed not me. You are simply not a human. The light in Xia Ho's eyes, which had been dim like a firefly that could be killed by the cold wind at any time, became bright at this moment. He said sternly, you are the son of Yama. 15 years ago, the divine priest of light thought that the son of Yama had been born in the Xianwei general's mansion, and the West Hill divine palace had instructed Xia Ho to carry out a purge. That was why there were so many stories and tonight's bloody battle. Before Xia Ho died, he recalled the doubts of tonight's battle. Those who were not there but had arrived through Ning Ke became more and more convinced of this judgment. He looked at Ning Ke and smiled strangely. He cursed with resentment, Haotian above, you, the son of Yama, will one day be burned to ashes by Haotian's divine light, just like me. I am the son of Yama, which probably makes it easier for you to accept the fact that you will die in my hands. But unfortunately, I have nothing to do with Yama. Ning Ke said, and each of us will die eventually, and we will all be burned to ashes by Haotian's divine light. So your curse means nothing to me. You are really not the son of Yama? Xia Ho murmured, if you are not the son of Yama, how could you escape from Cheng and at such a young age? If you are not the son of Yama, how could you surpass the state and defeat me? How could I die today? His cheeks were as wrinkled as a willow tree that had been split open by lightning, full of confusion and unwillingness. If Ning Ke was not the son of Yama, how could he have such great luck and such an incredible lucky chance that allowed him to cross states to challenge and kill the powerful Ning Ke? General Xia Ho, who had been arrogant and tyrannical for decades, looked like an old man spitting saliva at the village entrance looking for the thief who had kicked open the widow's door last night before he died. Then he raised his head, looked at Ning Ke, and said painfully, I don't want to die. Ning Ke said, I want you to die. No one wanted to die. Most people died unnaturally because other people in the world wanted them to die. Xia Ho did not want to die. He wanted to live and continue to have glory and power. Ning Ke wanted him to die very much. He wanted to dig out his lungs, rack his brains, and be heartbroken for 15 years. That was why Xia Ho died. Xia Ho's body, which was still as burly as a mountain, fell straight backward, dispersing the fog-like steam around him. He fell into the lake with a bang, splashing water everywhere. The top layer of the cold lake had been boiled by Haotian's divine flame and kept rolling. It looked like a hot spring in the valley of the Yen territory, or a big pot of clear soup. Xiaoho's body floated in the boiling lake with his eyes wide open. A trace of doubt and unwillingness could still be seen on his blood-stained face, and the skin on his thin cheeks gradually became strangely red. Many years ago, in the military camp at the foot of Min Mountain, the former saintess of the Devil's Doctrine, Murong Linshuang, danced the Devil's Dance, which shocked the world. Powerhouses of the West Hill Divine Palace gathered, and sword radiance crisscrossed the mountains and rivers. Xiaoho did not hesitate and cooked her to death, resolutely betraying the Devil's Doctrine and joining Haotian Taoism. That was the most important turning point in Xiaoho's life. However, he probably did not expect that he would be cooked by the boiling water after his death, just like that woman. If there was a heaven's way, then this was the so-called cycle. Looking at Xiaoho's body bobbing up and down in the boiling lake, Ning Ke suddenly said, "Who said that mutton giblets must be eaten on the winter solstice? Who said that you can't stab someone to death without a spearhead?" This was what he said to Yi Hongyu by the mutton giblets pot in autumn. Yi Hongyu understood the first part of the sentence, but did not understand the second part. Today was the winter solstice, and it was the time to eat mutton giblet soup. The snow lake was full of warm and humid water vapor, and standing on the lake was like standing next to a pot of mutton giblets, or like the steam scrubbing room in the courtyard of the House of Red Sleeves. The first person Ning Ke killed for revenge, the censor Zhang Yiqi, died in that place. Ning Ke felt very warm, very calm, and very relaxed at this time, as if all his pores had relaxed in the steam scrubbing room, and then he ate a big pot of mutton giblets with coriander and fermented bean curd sauce. Who said that the gatekeeper's son can't take revenge? Who said that the see-through state can't cross the state to kill the knowing destiny state? He turned around and walked towards the south bank of Yanming Lake. Occasionally, he raised his arm to wipe his face. It was unknown whether he was wiping away the dust or tears, but his face, especially the corner of his eyes, became very red. Sang Sang had already gone down the cliff and came to the snow lake. Her thin body was already very weak at this time, but she still had to hold the big black umbrella and drag the heavy arrow box, which seemed to be more and more strenuous. Looking at the figure in the sparse snow in front of them, the two quickened their steps at the same time. When they met and looked at each other's familiar face, they had mixed feelings and did not know what to say. So they did not say anything, and Ning Ke held Sang Sang in his arms. He hugged her so tightly that their faces were squeezed together, and with tear stains, they looked a little funny. Ning Ke's face was a little red and hot, and Sang Sang's face was very pale and cold. Their faces were pressed together, and they both felt very comfortable, and then calm. By the bridge on the west bank of the lake, Chen Pipi loosened his tightly clenched hand and patted the railing lightly. There was a blood mark on the railing. He had been too worried for Ning Ke when he was watching the battle, and he was so nervous that he actually cut his hand. Tang Xiaotang glanced at the green robe on the other side of the bridge, and held Chen Pipi's hand, walked out of the pier, and walked towards the two hugging on the snow lake. Yi Hongyu stood on the wooden bridge and looked in the direction of the snow lake, without any emotion on her face. Then she closed her eyes, and her beautiful thin eyebrows slightly furrowed, as if she was thinking about something. In the snow hall of the palace, the empress stood expressionlessly at the threshold. Her gentle face was already covered with tears. The emperor gently hugged her from behind, wanting to give her some comfort. More and more tears flowed from her eyes, and she wanted to break free from his embrace. His Majesty hugged her tightly, and the empress struggled angrily, but in the end, she could not break free. This was not because she was too sad, or because she had no strength. She turned around and threw herself into the warm embrace of her husband, crying silently to her heart's content, and the front of her imperial robe was soaked. Under the snow pavilion outside the hall, the nation master, Li Qingshan, looked in the direction of the Yanming Lake in the south with a complicated expression. Master Huang Yang withdrew his palm from the ancient bell, and the bell gradually stopped ringing. The whole Chang'an city was quiet. The whole world was quiet. In the winter forest on the east bank of the Yanming Lake, the cicadas suddenly chirped again. The sound was sad, but it was full of joy. There is one more chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.